Good morning. I will call the March 14th, 2023 meeting of the Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Supervisor Hartman?
Here.
Supervisor Capps?
Here.
Supervisor Nelson?
Here.
Supervisor Labanino?
Here.
And Chair Williams?
Here. I just want to say for a note, we're meeting in two locations. It's going to be very interesting today because most of the resolutions are up north. So I will be handing it over to our Vice Chair, Steve Lavanino, for the 8 items so that he can actually present to human beings instead of me present to ether. But at this time, please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item of business is the approval of minutes from the March 7th, 2023 meeting. Is there a motion?
Hartman moves approval.
Nelson seconds.
Is there discussion? Then we will do a roll call vote.
Supervisor Hartman?
Aye.
Supervisor Capps?
Aye.
Supervisor Nelson?
Aye.
Supervisor Labanino?
Aye.
And Chair Williams?
Aye. Next is the CEO's report, which we do have in a report this week.
Thank you, Chair Williams, Vice Chair Lavanino, and board members. 2 quick updates, one quick and one more informational for the board about the storms. The first one is just a quick update about our housing element, just that the public comment period did close in early March. The department received 450 comment letters, and they are currently being reviewed. The public comment process has been very beneficial to the department, and so far has yielded additional sites, including 7 new county-owned sites that can be considered for rezones and future housing, and UCSB faculty staff housing. The draft housing element will be submitted to the state at the end of March. And as you know, they take 90 days to review the document. More information is on the P&D website on the housing element update page, and the public can go to it by getting on our webpage, going to planning and development, and there's a link to the housing element. The maps are not yet updated, but will be in the next week or so, and the draft, once submitted to HCD, the state, will also be posted on the website. So that's just a quick update on the housing element. Today, I also want to invite our OEM director, Kelly Hubbard, who's going to talk a little bit about the storm. As you know, a storm system is forecasted to bring several inches of rain to Santa Barbara County. An evacuation order went into place at 8 a.m. this morning for identified parcels in Santa Barbara County's south coast burn scars of Alisal Cave and Thomas due to threats of life and safety. There's an interactive map that we have on the OEM Ready SBC website. Ms. Hubbard is in the room as well as Chief Hartwig. Ms. Hubbard?
Good morning, Chair and Supervisors. Couple other quick items just for awareness. In addition to the concerns regarding the burn scar areas, I do want to highlight that in the January storms and other storms, we've had quite a few areas where we've had mudslides, debris on roads, areas where there's been significant flooding. And so we want all residents to remain vigilant. This is a county-wide storm. We do have some specific concerns with the Sisquoc, Gary, Tepesquay, and Foxing Canyon areas because of continued releases from some of our reservoirs and expected increases in river flows along the Sisquoc Santa Maria River and then also along the San Ynez River. And so we just want our residents to remain very cognizant that the bulk of the rain is today, Tuesday, but tomorrow is really when a lot of those stormwater start entering our creeks and our tributaries. And so tomorrow is when we'll start seeing additional flows in those rivers and creeks. And so just continued vigilance through tomorrow, even if those that bulk of that rain might be gone. For support, we do have the Wake Center open as an emergency shelter for those who might need sheltering. We do not yet have a evacuation center open in North County since there's no direct evacuation orders in North County. However, if residents need sheltering in North County, please do call the call center so that we can work with Red Cross and identify ways to support those community or those residents. The Santa Barbara County Call Center is open. That number is 833-688-5551. You can also find information at readysbc.org. And animal services, we do not have animal evacuation centers quite open yet since we haven't had an identified need. But again, if anyone needs animal evacuation services or support, they can call Animal Services at 805-681-4332. And then for supervisors, more order of business, the proclamation that we have that is ongoing for the January storms, that one will be updated for our next board meeting next week to include the ongoing storm conditions. And so we'll be bringing forth a new proclamation to include that additional information in the new storms. I don't know if the chief wanted to add additional information about pre-positioning of resources.
Thank you, Kelly. Mr. Chair, Supervisor Capps, and our Santa Maria members, we are pre-positioned with quite a bit of equipment. So we received pre-positioning approval for about 100 additional staff to include hand crews, heavy equipment. We have hoist capability for 24 hours. And multiple swiftwater patrols and vehicles. And in addition to that, we have some high clearance rescue vehicles at Earl Warren on standby. So we're ready. We hope that you are prudent in the activities that you undertake today in the storm, and know that the majority of the rescues that we have in the waterways are a result of people who don't believe that they'll be swept away. It's not people that intentionally go swimming in the waterways. It's people that are too close or that they misjudge the power of the water that they're close to. So that's all I have. A huge shout out to the Type 3 Incident Management Team. I think it was stated this morning at the briefing. Today we are one department, 3,000 square miles, and we're prepared to assist the public wherever and whenever we're needed. Thank you.
Questions from the board? Up in Santa Maria first?
I have a question, Chair. I'm just curious if we've got anybody on staff that could address, with the increased flows coming out of Twitchella and Kachuma, if we've taken a look at whether Pioneer Street in Guadalupe needs to be evacuated again, and if so, or if not, where do those folks, what's the best place for them to get updates on those flows?
Chair, I believe there's flood control in Santa Maria. I think I don't know if they're prepared to answer some of those questions.
Walter's here.
And Walter, maybe you could just also highlight the different places that people can look at rain gauges and real-time photography of our debris basins so that when we're asking people to monitor, they have real information.
Sure. Good morning, Chair Williams, members of the board. I'll speak to Guadalupe first. We have been meeting with Guadalupe Fire and Guadalupe Police, County Fire as well. We had a meeting with them either yesterday, I think 2 days ago in the morning. We sat at State Route 1 with our maintenance crews to show them exactly where the breakout would be. It used to be in the area of 20,000 CFS where it would impact those neighborhoods. And now I think it's significantly lower, maybe 5,000 to 6,000. So we've informed emergency services and they're being alert of that. And so is our staff to look at that. Some of the other problem areas is there that home on down West Main Street, the Moretti property. We're also keeping our eyes on that, or at least emergency services keeping their eyes and looking at that as well. On the South County, just to be quick on that, we're keeping our eyes on the creeks, especially in the Montecito area, Mission Creek, because those were problematic on January 9th. So we're staying vigilant to keep our eyes on that. These flows are going to likely take these creeks right to their peak. So we just got to monitor and be vigilant on that. As far as cameras and rain gauges on our county website, the Water Resources Division website, there's a hydrology section. I will try to figure out a way. We'll post it on social media as to where the links are to make it a little bit easier for anybody else.
Just one last question for me is just for the education of the public, who can you just explain who controls the flows coming out of both Kachuma and Twitchell?
The flows coming out of Kachuma are controlled by the Bureau, the Federal Bureau of Reclamation. We don't control that. I think that's the important part. And then for Santa Maria, it's controlled by both Army Corps and it's controlled by the Santa Maria Water Conservation District as well. Both of those groups take input from us, look at our modeling, but we don't make the County of Santa Barbara does not make the decision on that.
Chair,
Other questions
an
from the
additional
audience?
question for Mr. Rubalcaba. So the releases that we started having in this at the Twitchell Dam this last week, could you talk a little bit more about the reasons for those? Because there were some concerns about the community wanting to make sure as much of that water stayed in the dam as possible for water recharge. But I think in our conversations, there is some risk of spillover and the impacts of that if we don't make those releases in advance.
Supervisor Nelson, through the chair, it's a balancing act, right? So there's quite a bit of inflow that's forecasted to enter the Twitchell Reservoir. So we need to do some releases because we don't want to get to the spillway elevation where it becomes non-controlled. So any flow coming in to the reservoir would spill over and go downstream. So what they're trying to do now is release enough flow to control it and keep the elevations lower. So if a peak flow does come, we don't have uncontrolled releases. So prior to the peak of the Sisquoc River, they're going to try to get those flows a little bit higher, 2,500 CFS. And as the flows begin to peak through the Sisquoc River, which is a different branch of it, they will reduce those flows to about 700 CFS. So it's not impacting the cumulative Sisquoc and Cuyama rivers together.
If you could help me with the magnitude if the spillover came across Twitchell, how many CFS are we talking about there?
I'll talk about the highest amount, just worst case. The highest model I saw yesterday was 30,000 CFS. Right now, they're releasing 2,500. And tomorrow during the peak, they're hoping to just release 700. So if it was 30,000 versus 700, that would actually be greater than the Sisquoc tomorrow. Right now, it's significantly less.
Well, I think it's important to get that number out there. I mean, we're
Yeah,
talking six
yeah.
times the amount that you're talking about of flowing, and that's just only one branch of the Santa Maria River.
Right.
So the potential impact to the Santa Maria Valley and that river could be catastrophic if we have a spillover at Twitchell.
Yes, if it's not managed correctly, it could be a big impact. And that's why we've been working on this since early this week or even last week to release some flows.
Well, thank you again for all your diligence.
Yep, thanks.
And this is not Walter's fault. Walter took over the job after a 7-year drought and now it's nothing but rain.
Supervisor
Sheriff Brown.
Capps.
Good morning, Supervisor Lavinino, members of the board. Just wanted to give you an update on some evacuation warnings that have been conducted. First of all, in the South County, we worked last night and completed door-to-door notifications in all of the evacuation warning and evacuation areas effective as of 8 o'clock this morning. We completed door-to-door notifications in the areas of the 3 burn scars, the Thomas Fire, the Painted Cave area, and also in drawing my blank here, Alisal. Excuse me. Thank you. We also flew the rivers last night and did audible warnings for homeless that were in areas adjacent to the river or under bridges. We have pre-positioned, the National Guard has pre-positioned high water vehicles in our county, and we've taken our 3 high water vehicles and pre-positioned them as well, just in the event that they're needed. With respect to Pioneer that you asked about, Most of that is within the jurisdiction of Guadalupe, and Guadalupe Police Department has done evacuation warnings with residents that are in that area. There is one resident that's in a county area, and we went out and met with the people that live in that residence as well, and warned them about the potential. We're on track for the heaviest rain being expected about 11 o'clock today, and it looks as though, we have, in addition to the high water vehicles, the fire has pre-positioned swift water rescue capabilities and all. And so just to echo what Kelly said to everyone, this is a countywide, expect to have a countywide impact, but the predictions, the forecasts at this point seem to be a little less than what the concern was last night in terms of what has actually been forecast, but still we're going to get a lot of rain about midday.
Thank you, Sheriff. Supervisor Capps.
Thank you to our entire emergency response team, not just those who are here, but everyone who are out in the field now working. I remember from our storms in January that there was 400 calls to emergency services, 100 rescues roughly, and the majority of those were people stuck in their vehicles. So I was hoping one of you might be able to speak to what we should do as drivers. If we have to drive today, what time would be ideal? Help people plan kind of out their day, obviously, and give some warning so that we avoid those kind of rescues.
Thank you, Supervisor Capps. To the chair, that's great advice. Stay out if you can. The heaviest rain, as Sheriff said, will be 11 to 4 or 5-ish, so if you can stay out, great. We all know our low-lying areas, especially those areas in our communities or our neighborhoods that flood. Stay away from those. And then, of course, if you need help or you're stuck, we say turn around, don't drown, and that's a state motto. If it looks like it's flooded, even if it looks like you can drive through it, turn around. If you do get stuck, unfortunately, dial 911 and we'll help you. We do have some high water vehicles, as the sheriff said, pre-positioned in some of those low-lying areas here in the south and up in the north to make sure that we can get you out if we need to.
Thank you, Chief Hartwig. I just want to repeat that people should avoid driving, especially between 11 and 4, and turn around, don't drown is a good motto for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board members? Seeing none, I will move on to clerk announcements. Madam Clerk, are there any announcements or changes to the agenda today?
Chair Williams and members of the board, I do have a few quick announcements this morning. We posted an addendum on Friday, March 10th, amending today's administrative agenda. The administrative agenda was amended to reflect the removal of recommended action letter D and relettering of the subsequent recommended actions for administrative item 10 from the General Services Department regarding the County Emergency Operation and Regional Fire Communications Center project. In addition, the addendum also reflected the request received from the Sheriff's Office to withdraw administrative item 16 regarding authorizing the County Executive Office to execute the DOJ Equitable Sharing Agreement and certification on behalf of the board on an ongoing basis. These changes can be added to the balance of the administrative agenda. Administrative item 28, a retirement resolution for Carol Mosley, has been requested to be changed from a resolution to be presented to an honorary resolution. Administrative item 1 is also requesting a continuance to the 4-4 agenda. This also can be added to the balance of the administrative agenda. For the Board of Supervisors' methods of public participation and to provide public comment on general public comment or on an item on the board's agenda, please see page 2 of the agenda. Individuals that would like to provide verbal public comment virtually may do so via Zoom by registering in advance via the link available on page 2. If you have any questions, please contact the clerk of the board's office at 805-568-2240. That concludes my announcements for today.
So Supervisor Lavanino, I will turn over the A agenda items to you.
All right. Thank you, Chair Williams. Let's see. Would any board members like to pull any items from the administrative agenda?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Lavanio. I have a quick comment on A1. I don't need to, just a comment on that continuation, and then also A5.
Okay. Anybody else? Santa Barbara? And Madam Clerk, do any members of the public request to pull any items on the administrative agenda?
Chair Lavanino, members of the board, we do have 2 requests. A request was made for administrative item 12 and also for administrative item 19.
Okay, so I have 1, 5, 12, and 19. Why don't we take those in order? And even though it's just a comment on one, we're going to need, let's read one in and we'll just go in order. Please read administrative item number 1, please.
Chair Lavanino, members of the board, administrative item 1 is from the Behavioral Wellness Department. It is to consider recommendations regarding an agreement with Idea Engineering, Inc. for fiscal years 2022 through 2024.
Thank you. I had some discussions with Dr. Navarro yesterday, and I'm pleased that we're going to continue this to April 4th. This item is a suicide prevention program that we're going to be working with a consultant to purchase some media buys and address this very important issue that is impacting many people in our community. But I was concerned about the dollar amount. So we're going to dig a little deeper, making sure that we're getting the most for our dollars. These are MHSA dollars, important dollars that we need to be allocating to making sure that we're dealing with those that are most in need in our community. So I want to make sure that's done in the most fiscally responsible way possible. So I asked for it to move so I can get some additional information on that. So I'll work with Dr. Navarro and we'll hopefully be able to approve this on the 4th.
Okay. You don't need a separate vote on that.
I think we just that's part of the motion.
Right. Okay. So item 5, Madam Clerk.
Chair Lavanino, members of the board, administrative item 5 is from the Community Services Department. It is to consider recommendations regarding a second amendment to the agreement with Rincon Consultants, Inc. for climate action planning services.
Supervisor Nelson.
Yes, thank you, Chair Lavanino. I'm fine with moving forward with this, but I think that it's probably incomplete. I think that there needs to be some additional funds provided for this contract. Part of our climate action plan will include quite a few different programs that will be necessary for the county to complete over the next few years to make sure we meet those goals. My conversations with the Community Services Department is that they don't have good cost estimates yet or vetted cost estimates, and that they would need additional funds in the contract to work with Rincon and planning and others. I don't think that we can make an educated decision on these programs and adopting those if we actually don't know what the costs are, and they're not yet in our 5-year forecast. And so I'm really concerned about that and want to make sure that we fully are able to understand what the impacts of some of these programs would be to our budget and our county as a whole as we move forward with approving our climate action plan this spring. So maybe it's just a comment for Mr. Chapchian. Maybe you can comment on that, on whether you need to come back to the board with some additional revisions to the contract to make sure that we have those numbers in place.
So thank you, Supervisor Nelson. We do break down the measures into 3 segments. Essentially, there's high, medium, and low. And the consultant will take a look at the 4 major items, which are natural gas appliances, building performance, employer trip reductions, and phase out of light duty. So when we bring the climate action plan, that's when we can ask for more money for further detailed analysis. I think this is kind of a broader 10,000 foot level document at this point that they're looking at. So I have both Ashley Watkins and Garrett Wong there if you have any more questions. But I think, there is a medium, high, and low. Right now, it's too early to get the cost estimates for the programs.
Yeah, I guess I'm just going to pre-warn you, that's going to be a problem. We're going to be asked to approve a document that have programs in place that are going to require the county to do certain things. And, I would usually like to know the price tag before I commit the county to moving forward. So I won't be able to support a climate action plan that doesn't have costs associated with that. Some of these programs can be very robust. And for us not to understand that and not to see them on 5-year forecasts is not fiscally responsible and wouldn't be something I could support. So I understand that this is a high level document, but we will be committing our board and our county to certain things that I think we need to understand. So I guess I'm just putting out there, if we're not able to do that work in advance of the presentation, that's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I don't think we're committing right now. Again, it's a high level document. The measures, the actions, and the cap are very high level. So the details are going to be worked out. It's much like the housing element and some of the other elements that the planning department brings forward. So this is just kind of extending the contract for Rincon to do further assessment and finish up the product.
So we won't be committed to these programs when we adopt our climate action plan?
Well, when you adopt it, yes.
Okay. Well, I'd like to know the price.
Right. This is just extending the contract right now.
No, I understand. And I think we need to extend the contract further. In my conversations with your department, you've said you guys would need additional funds to do that in advance. And so that's why I'm highlighting it today, is because you're saying you need those additional funds so that we can have that information. So I'm asking you, I'm glad to approve this today, but I think it should be more so that we can make sure that you have the funds necessary to do the fiscal analysis that's necessary for us to make good decisions.
Yeah, for the real detailed analysis, we would need additional funds. Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Supervisor Nelson, through the chair, I just wanted to note that we would like to approve today's contract because it's coming up on expiration. And then also just mentioning, Mr. Chapshin mentioned that it's a high-level policy document. So it's pretty common for climate action plans to not provide a really detailed level of analysis. I understand the desire for a deeper analysis, but we're going to have to come back to the board for many of these individual measures. And at that time, we'd have more detailed information to be able to provide a more accurate fiscal analysis. And, doing sort of a deeper level of fiscal analysis now, not only would we need additional funds to do that, but we would also need more time to do that. So that would delay us bringing the climate action plan to the board.
Thank you, Ms. Watkins. I do understand that, and I'm actually absolutely fine with approving this contract. I'm actually telling you that it needs to be for more money than what you're asking. So I know that's a unique thing for me to be asking that, but I do think that, it's not good public policy to commit an institution to programs without knowing the cost. And I understand that may not be the practice in some other counties. It would be my desire that we had that practice in our county. And I understand that there might be some delay involved, but I believe that's good public policy. And I'm letting you know right now that I don't think it's a good idea, at least for my vote, to move it forward to the board without having some of those numbers in place. I think that Ms. Anderson would love to have that as part of her budget moving forward, because often a lot of governments institutions have these high-level documents that commit future boards to programs that they're unfunded, and then we don't meet our climate action plans. So we waste all this time and effort. So I think we need to be eyes wide open when we commit ourselves to these programs. I've got a community plan that has a lot of unfunded mandates. There's other things within the housing element. I know we are in a rush to get that done, but I do think that we should have some costs associated with that, or else these things are just empty promises to the state and to our constituents. And so it's a real concern of mine. That's why I want to bring it up, because I want to sit that flag out there, and hopefully you guys can come back with another budget revision on this contract with Rincon, so we can start to dig into those costs earlier, not later.
Okay, we'll do that.
All right, cool. So it sounds like you're good moving forward today, so we don't need to pull that one for another vote. How about A12, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Vice Chair, I just wanted to comment on that. I think Supervisor Nelson brings up a good point, but I do think that it is a common practice when we are facing a large effort as part of the institution that we don't always know the total price tag for all of these things. Let's use the freeway project for one example. But what we do, as you point out, is make sure that there is fiscal planning. And so but my suggestion on the long run of this is that we put a little bit in every year for plan implementation into a fund to make sure that we can actually implement the elements of the climate action plan. But I'm comfortable approving the contract today.
Chair Williams, could I ask one clarifying question? When we do bring back some cost estimates on doing a deeper financial analysis, just looking for direction from the board on whether that should include costs to the county and to the community, or just to the county.
Chair Williams and Vice Chair Levanino and Ashley, I think the agendized item is approval of this contract. This no money contract to extend the date. I think those conversations about what should be funded, et cetera, will take place when you bring the climate action plan back to the board. I'm looking at county council and she's saying yes, so we need to limit this discussion to approval of this contract.
Right.
All right, so I think that ends that conversation. So let's go to A12.
Chair Williams and Vice Chair Lavanino. Administrative item 12 is from the Planning and Development Department. It is to consider recommendations regarding the 2022 Comprehensive Plan Annual Progress Report. And we have Kathleen Rosenthal via Zoom.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, well, good morning, Chair Williams and Board of Supervisors. I'm Kathleen Rosenthal, representing the Santa Ynez Valley Riders in our coalition Save Santa Barbara Equestrian Trails. As you may know, we've been following the countywide recreation management plan for a number of years now. And in reviewing this report for the Long Range Planning Division, I didn't notice anything on that would coordinate with planning and development for the changes to our not only the zoning ordinance, but the comprehensive plan with this particular document. And I wondered, yesterday we heard a brief description of what the plan would be going forward, but I didn't hear how planning and development would be involved or if there would be any oversight for that plan development. And I wondered if not at this point, if at some point in the future, your board and the public would be able to get an idea of what the coordination is going to be between the two departments, the Parks Division and the Planning Department, to ensure that these recommended changes to our zoning ordinance and comprehensive plan going forward are coordinated with P&D. So anyway, those are my comments, just something that I thought we should all be aware of. And I thank you very much for your time.
Vice
All
Chair
right.
Lavanino, we have no further requests to speak for this item.
Okay. Supervisor Hartman.
Just as a point of information, it's my understanding that the Planning Commission will be holding 2 hearings on the Recreation Master Plan. So there'll be opportunity for the public to learn more and see how it integrates.
Excellent. Thank you. That takes us to A19, our final administrative item that's pulled.
Vice Chair Lavanino, members of the board, administrative item 19 is from the Public Works Department, Board of Directors, Laguna County Sanitation District. It is a set hearing to consider recommendations regarding the Laguna County Sanitation District ordinance relative to services changes, connection changes, and trunk sewer fees, and a resolution relative to the collection of service charges on the tax roll. This project is located within the 4th and 5th districts.
Our speaker is in Santa Maria. Yeah.
And we have a Mr. Brian Adam in Santa Maria.
Mr. Adam.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I see behind Mr. Williams there, the sign says, "The County of Santa Barbara delivers exceptional services so all that can enjoy a safe, healthy, and prosperous life." My family's been here since 1940, and I can say that was the way it was here for several years. But since this Casmalia Resources went through, I've really had a different opinion on this. And then Laguna Sanitation's now charging the unincorporated area, which I've asked several times. Last time I even asked you, Mr. Williams, you promised to call me the next day and you never did. So you don't have much credibility with me. You really, I'm not a guy that's going to sit down to this stuff going on here. We're paying $150 a month for sanitation right now because the Laguna Sanitation went 60 years without any maintenance, and it's a cesspool out there. And now it's like, oh, we need $57 million. So we're going to charge everybody 3 times the amount for their sanitation. You know, that's a lot of money, $1,800 a year. And it's billed out of your property taxes, which for some reason, property taxes are supposed to be paid for the following year, but you guys are pre-charging us. And then I don't understand that fact either, but I do have a family member that works for the IRS, so I'll get to the bottom of that. So anyhow, I want to know what the count is on the homes in the unincorporated area, because we need to do the math here. Okay, so where I live is the biggest horseshoe in the valley off Lake View Road. Oops, excuse me. Between Los Padres and Angeles Avenue, there's 330 houses, which is generating $670,000 a year for the last 3 years, which comes up to about $1.7 million that they've already collected for this deal. And that's just in a 3-block radius. So let's have the number of the houses. I'm tired of waiting on this because you guys owe the taxpayers the answer.
Well, this item is just to set a hearing for May 9th is when we'll hear the entire thing, and there'll be an entire presentation. And there'll be testimony and public comment at that time.
Okay, at that time? Okay,
Yep,
so
May
I'm gonna
9th.
go to May 9th and I'll see
Yep.
you guys then.
All right,
And
looking forward to it.
Let's be ready to rock and roll. Thank you very much.
All right, appreciate it. Thanks for being here today. Okay, so I don't think any items require a separate vote, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the administrative agenda.
So moved with the additions that the clerk announced.
Second.
A motion by Supervisor Hartman, a second by Supervisor Williams. Roll call, please.
Supervisor Hartman,
Aye.
Supervisor Capps,
Aye.
Supervisor Nelson,
Aye.
Supervisor Lavanino,
Aye.
and Chair Williams.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay. Well, I think that's why everybody was here today, right? To get to the administrative agenda. You guys can all go now. All right, so now we're at our fun part, our resolutions. Madam Clerk, can you read item 23 in, please?
Vice Chair Lavanino and members of the board, administrative item 23 is sponsored by Supervisor Capps. It is to adopt a resolution proclaiming March 14th, 2023 as Arbor Day in Santa Barbara County. Joining us here in Santa Barbara, we have Bill Ortega. If you'll please join us at the podium, I will read the resolution into the record. Whereas Santa Barbara County has a long and prosperous agricultural history of growing annual and perennial plants for products, as well as landscape benefits. Whereas the residents of Santa Barbara County treasure the valuable landscape trees provide on both public and private lands, and consider them to be essential living features that contribute to their quality of life experience. And whereas the natural beauty of our urban forest and county landscapes, as well as the enhanced beauty of planted and developed landscapes environments, add to the many qualities that draw visitors and new residents to one of California's most beautiful counties. And whereas 4 of the largest unincorporated cities in Santa Barbara County have for many years and been proud and active participants in the City Tree USA program, sponsored by Arbor Day Foundation. Whereas March 7th through the 14th is Arbor Day week in California. And whereas, as governing stewards responsible for planting and the care of all trees growing on county public lands, as well as promoting and encouraging conservation of valuable trees growing on private lands, Now therefore, it is hereby ordered and resolved that this Board of Supervisors of the County of Santa Barbara, together with the Public Works and the Community Services Departments, proclaim Tuesday, March 14th, 2023 as Arbor Day throughout the county and encourage all citizens to recognize the multitude of benefits our community derives from the conscious acts of planting and properly maintaining landscape trees, and request that all institutions of primary and secondary education throughout the county seek ways to observe this important day and teach students the values of trees in their lives, passed and adopted today.
Good morning, Chair Williams, member of the board. My name is Bill Ortega. I am one of the supervisors in Public Works from Urban Forest Department. I'm here to receive the Arbor Day Proclamation Resolution. This will be our 20th annual Arbor Day the County of Santa Barbara participated in the 19th year, certified as Tree City USA. We are one of 2 counties in state certified, San Francisco being the other county. We will be hosting it at El Camino School, the principal Lorena Chavez, and with Second District Laura Capps on April 7th. On behalf of Public Works, Urban Forest, and our partners, Parks Department, we wish to thank you for supporting Arbor Day and our opportunity to introduce the youth, the importance of trees in our daily lives. I would like to share that Urban Forest team maintains 9,300 street trees within the 5 districts. Once again, I would like to thank you for the support, and our Department of Public Works appreciates you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Vice Chair Lavanino.
Yes.
I'd just like to make a couple comments, and
Sure.
I was honored to put forward this resolution on a day where our trees are getting quite a big cup of water, and honor your service. I was able to talk to Mr. Ortega and learned that there's 30 people out there in our county maintaining our urban forest. And as a kid, I always loved trees. It's why my favorite color is green. And I just want to thank you for the kind of the unseen work that you do to make sure that we all get to, even in urban areas, look around and see green and be grateful for our trees. So thank you for your work.
All right, thank you very much. That takes us to our next item. One of our many retirements today is item 24. Madam Clerk?
Vice Chair Lavanino and members of the board, Administrative Item 24 is sponsored by Supervisor Hartman. It is to adopt a resolution of commendation honoring Michael Allen upon his retirement from the Department of Behavioral Wellness after over 25 years of faithful and distinguished service to the citizens of Santa Barbara County. Joining us in person, we have Tony here in Santa Barbara, John Winkler, and Michael Allen in Santa Maria. If you will please join us at the podium, I will now read the resolution into the record. Whereas Michael Allen began his employment with the Department of Behavioral Wellness as an extra help mental health caseworker in May 1998 and began as a full-time employee in 1999. And whereas in April of 2002, Michael began working with youth in the Multi-Agency Integrated System of Care program before transitioning to the Mobile Crisis Team in 2014. Whereas Michael is a skilled caseworker who has a knack for quickly building rapport with individuals and de-escalating crisis situations. His calm demeanor and Southern charm suited him well as he rapidly became a well-respected mobile crisis staff member, followed by becoming a lead staff member who assisted with training new employees. His skills in working with both clients and staff earned his promotion in 2015 to the position of team supervisor of the Behavioral Wellness Mobile Crisis Team in Lompoc. And whereas 3 years later in 2018, Michael was asked to assume responsibility for the Santa Maria Mobile Crisis Team, as well as the team in Lompoc. True to his fashion, he rapidly accepted the challenge and in no time earned the trust and respect of his new team. In January of 2020, Michael was promoted in classification from caseworker to mental health rehabilitation specialist, continuing his leadership in both Lompoc and Santa Maria Mobile Crisis Teams. And whereas, in addition to Michael's departmental service and leadership, he has also been instrumental in assisting the greater community through multiple tragedies, including the Thomas Fire, 9/1 debris flow, Conception boat fire, and communities impacted by the recent January storms. He served in local assistance centers, evacuation shelters, and the county call center. He has also offered multiple responses to support compassion centers at schools following unplanned deaths of students and teachers. Whereas Michael is never far from his cell phone 7 days a week, he is rapid in responding to inquiries from his staff, supervisors, or individuals from other organizations that need quick assistance. He is respected within the department and within border community organizations who have interactions with the crisis program, including local hospitals, law enforcement, homeless shelters, community-based organization providers, and more. Whereas Michael's dedication to the department and the border community, with his quick wit and sense of humor, kindness, and willingness to help out wherever and whomever needs assistance, has been greatly appreciated throughout his many years of service within the Department of Behavioral Wellness. Now, therefore, be it hereby ordered and resolved that this Board of Supervisors recognizes Michael Allen for his 25 years of service to the County of Santa Barbara, passed and adopted today.
All right. Okay. Good morning, board members Williams and here in Santa Barbara, and
I just want to recognize my staff, if I could. First of all, John Winkler, my boss, for doing this. I just wanted to fake quietly.
You can have to speak.
I just wanted to fake quietly into the night. But I do appreciate this recognition today, and I want to say that I thank my staff, who both in Lompoc and Santa Maria, that have really made this possible. Crisis services is perhaps the most difficult component to mental health service delivery. Trying to save the person who doesn't want to be saved at that moment, trying to help that person who's so ill that they may not even realize that you're there to help and see you as an adversary, and they meet you with, fear or even anger. So I really appreciate this moment, and I want to recognize that, and I thank you both. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Hey, Michael Allen, it's Tony Navarro here in South County. And I just wanted to say thank you so much for your years of service to the department. I only had the privilege of working with you for the last 15 months, but for anyone who has ever interacted with you or had the pleasure of meeting you knows that you are exactly the right person in this right chair for us in crisis services. Your positivity and your compassion and your kindness is infectious. You have been a wonderful leader and model for staff, not just in your division, but across the department. So I just want to thank you so much for your years of service and hope that you have a great time in retirement.
Awesome. Thank you.
just want to say a couple extra words. I didn't realize this till last night, but Michael and I actually started with the department in the same year, 19.
That doesn't sound good. You're not making an announcement today, are you?
No.
Okay.
No. And I didn't get to know Michael very well back then, but I left the department, moved up north, came back in 2016 as a team supervisor for crisis services in Santa Barbara. And Michael immediately took me under his wing and really helped me to become a great supervisor, helped me to understand the program. All the things he just mentioned about crisis services, Michael taught me a lot about all of that. And I really appreciate all that he's done for me and for the department. And then I've transitioned through a couple other positions, and Michael has basically become my wingman in the last 5 years, really helping me out. Anytime I got in a bind, he got me out of it. Anytime I had a question, he was able to answer it. He's always been there for his staff. He's always been there for me. And as you heard in the resolution, he's always been there for our community. So thank you for everything you've done, Michael. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to miss working with you. Thank you. All right.
Madam Clerk, 825, please.
Vice Chair Lavanino and members of the board, administrative item 25 is sponsored by Supervisor Hartman. It is to adopt a resolution of commendation honoring Michael A. Villalobos upon his retirement for the Public Works Department after over 26 years of faithful and distinguished service to the citizens of Santa Barbara County. We have Michael Villalobos up in Santa Maria. If you will please join us at the podium, I will now read the resolution into the record. Whereas Michael Andy Villalobos began his employment with the County of Santa Barbara on May 5, 1997, as a maintenance worker in the Public Works Transportation Division. He joined the Flood Control District in 2004. As a Flood Control District team member, Andy has been a maintenance leader for over 19 years. Whereas Andy, after just 1 year of employment, faced the 1998 storm, one of the larger flooding events in Santa Barbara County's recent history. Although it resulted in weeks of extended days and weekend hours, having this opportunity so early in his career proved valuable in establishing a clear vision for the Public Works' true purpose of preventative maintenance efforts. This experience again proved valuable during the 2018 Thomas Fire debris flow event, when Andy was temporarily assigned to the South County to help the community of Montecito respond and recover. And whereas, for the last 26 years, Andy has been one of our go-to team members for the North County infrastructure, including Lompoc, Buellton, and the San Ynez Valley. Serving as a North County expert, Andy has played a key role in establishing the Flood Control District's goal to be knowledgeable and proficient countywide. And whereas, Andy, as an avid softball coach for the Lompoc Valley Girls Softball Association, learned communication, training techniques, and leadership skills that have served him well as the flood control maintenance leader. Similar to his role on the softball field, Andy worked side by side with his coworkers in training and mentoring until their skills were properly developed. Jumping ahead over 26 years, now those Andy trained are training the next generation of flood control staff using Andy's techniques. And whereas Andy will retire on March 31st, 2023, after nearly 26 years of faithful public service to Santa Barbara County, and now will have more time to spend with his wife Stacy, his son Andrew, and his daughter Miranda. Now therefore be it hereby ordered and resolved that this Board of Supervisors recognizes and thanks Michael Andy Villalobos for his 26 years of public service to the citizens of Santa Barbara County and wishes him the best in his well-deserved retirement, passed and adopted today.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Today, over the next 3 Public Works resolutions, this morning, we're celebrating exactly 100 years of outstanding public service to the residents of Santa Barbara County, over 3 people. And as you heard first up today, we have Andy Villalobos, and on behalf of the entire department, the Water Resources Division and the Flood Control District, we can't thank him enough for his 26 years of dedicated service. And you heard from the resolution, Andy had kind of a unique start here in Santa Barbara County in 1998 with the flooding events. He had been working here about a year, and he gained a tremendous amount of experience through that event. Really experience that our staff are gaining, new staff are gaining today through our winter. So That benefited Andy and certainly benefited all of us in Public Works in the community here in Santa Barbara with that experience. Because of those challenges early in his career, Andy led the Lompoc area and the San Ynez Valley area. So he did pretty much those areas independently with his team. He took that experience and did just a fine job leading the flood control group in that area. And as you heard, Andy's been a coach, and once a coach, always a coach. His leadership style is the coaches' teams. So he's used that coaching and that experience to develop really future leaders for our department. We can't thank Andy enough for everything he's done in Public Works and for the Flood Control District, and we're going to miss him after 26 years. So Andy, congratulations.
Just want to say thank you to the Santa Barbara County for giving me the opportunity to do what I enjoyed doing and meeting a lot of people on the way, working with a lot of great people, and never forget it. Thank you.
All right, that takes us to item A26, Madam Clerk.
Vice Chair Lavanino and members of the board, administrative item 26 is sponsored by Supervisor Lavanino. It's to adopt a resolution of commendation honoring Glenn A. Sweeney upon his retirement from the Public Works Department after over 37 years of faithful and distinguished service to the citizens of Santa Barbara County. Joining us in Santa Maria, we have Glenn Sweeney. If you'll please join us at the podium, I will read your resolution into the record. Glenn A. Sweeney began his employment with the County of Santa Barbara on October 20th, 1986, with the Public Works Transportation Division, working in the tree crew. He then joined the Flood Control District in 1988. As a Flood Control District team leader, Glenn has worked as a maintenance worker, heavy equipment operator, maintenance leader, and finally ending his 37-year career as a maintenance supervisor. And whereas in 1998, Glenn proved his value and commitment to the county when he and his team were called upon to help repair the damaged Santa Maria River levee. He, along with his team, spent 14 to 16 hours nonstop completing emergency repairs, helping to protect life and property of the adjacent communities. This work continued until the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers could mobilize and take over the project, likely saving millions in property damage. And whereas, following the Thomas Fire and 1/9 debris flow, Glenn's expertise was instrumental in the recovery of the community, and although he was a North County resident, he made it a priority to ensure the public's safety, even if it was on the far end of the county, adding 3 or more hours to his workday. And whereas, Glenn was never afraid to take on less glamorous, mundane, tedious, or challenging tasks needed to get the job completed, whether it be the midnight emergency patrols of the Santa Maria River levee, operating his D7 to push rock to slow water, or basin and channel clearing. His dedication even pushed him to go beyond his normal job duties to obtain his pest control advisor license and maintain it for over 30 years, helping maintenance operators take a more strategic path moving forward during yearly spraying operations. Glenn will retire on March 31st, 2023, after nearly 37 years of faithful public service to the Santa Barbara County, and will now have more time to enjoy his wife Brenda, sons Stephen and Casey, and their families. Now, therefore, be it hereby ordered and resolved that the Santa Barbara County Board of Supervisors recognizes and thanks Glenn Sweeney for his 37 years of public service to the citizens of Santa Barbara County and wishes him the best in his well-deserved retirement, passed and adopted today.
Mr. Chair and board members, I want to thank Glenn and honor him on behalf of the department, the Water Resources Division, and the Flood Control District for 37 outstanding years of public service. Wow. Glenn will be a big loss, certainly to the department and the district, but certainly to the residents up here in the North County. Not only because he kind of led an outstanding team up here, but after 37 years, Glenn was the guy that knew which valve to turn. He knew where the problematic areas were. He knew where the problems would occur before we did, and he would be able to take the resources and get out there and take care of business. So that type of knowledge is rare, that institutional knowledge, and it's not easy to replace. Also, Glenn's willingness to protect and serve the public to the best of his abilities year after year did not go unnoticed from a department perspective, because he was always on the job there to protect the community. He's been a great role model, specifically in the treatment of people. From my experiences and what his team has shared, it's always been kind of a consistent approach. It didn't matter if it was a brand new employee, a new supervisor, or a member of the public, even during high stress times. His approach never changed. It was deliberate, it was calm, and it was most importantly respectful. So Glenn, thank you for your outstanding service, and we wish you the best, and we hope you enjoy the next chapter of your life with your family. Great to see them here today. So congratulations, sir.
Well, I didn't know this day would ever come. When we started in '86, you don't think about your retirement. You just think about my next paycheck, getting the job done. But when I think about the job that we did for flood control and those guys, the work is awesome. I grew up in the creeks in Tanglewood, played in them all my life, and I worked in them for a long time. So it's been a great job. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I look forward to the new guys taking over, and they're going to do a wonderful job for us. So if you guys are in good hands, I'll still be around, but they're going to do the job. So thank you very much.
I just at the last, what was it, the 9th, January 9th, we had the big storm. Corey and I went out, and Corey told me there's not going to be anybody. This thing just got going, and it's just a mess out there. I don't know why we're going out there. What are we going to do? Well, I just wanted to make sure somebody was on the job. And sure enough, I didn't tell anybody I was going. I just drove out, and I found what I thought might be a problem area. Here comes a truck, and who's in it? It's Glenn. He was already on it, already knew that was going to be the spot that might be a problem. He actually already had our contractors out working on the issue. So Glenn, we're going to miss you. Thank you for your service. We appreciate it. Supervisor Nelson.
Yeah, he must have been in two places at the same time, because he was all over Orchid throughout the January 9th storms. And again, thank you, Glenn, for your work. I didn't recognize you not in your poncho. So thank you again for your service to our community in the North County and the entire community. I mean, it was your leadership was much appreciated. Thank you.
All right, that takes us to A27. By the way, you're going to be a lot busier, it looks like, behind you than you were when you were working for us. A27, please.
Vice Chair Lavanino and members of the board, administrative item 27 is sponsored by Supervisor Lavanino. It is to adopt a resolution of commendation honoring Curtis J. Clucker upon his retirement from the Public Works Department for over 37 years of faithful and distinguished service to the citizens of Santa Barbara County. Joining us in Santa Maria, we have Curtis J. Clucker. If you will join us at the podium, I will now read your resolution into the record. Kurt Clucker began his career with the Santa Barbara County Public Works Department on March 11th, 1985, as an equipment service worker in the Lompoc Road Yard. Whereas, over his 37-year career, Mr. Clucker worked his way from road maintenance worker to a maintenance staff assistant, with a stint as a heavy equipment operator for the flood control division in the North County Road Maintenance Superintendent for over a decade, after taking up his final post as road maintenance manager on January 16, 2017. And whereas Mr. Clucker has been instrumental in the Transportation Division's response to numerous local, state, and federal declared emergencies, including fires, floods, and debris flows. And whereas throughout his career at the county, Kurt has held the best interests of the citizens of Santa Barbara County as it relates to roads, sidewalks, trees, signs, pavement markings, and drainage, helping to provide a clear path, a smooth ride, and a safe trip for traveling public. And whereas, in addition to his work with the Public Works Department, Kurt was also very active in the Maintenance Superintendents Association, serving as the Central Coast Chapter President in 1993, on the Board of Directors for many years, and continuing as an honorary life member after 36 years and continuing his service to the organization. Whereas, known as a straight shooter in all unincorporated communities, Mr. Clucker is the epitome of the public service and has set a high bar for professionalism and challenges those around him to do the same. And whereas, after 37 years of faithful public service to the citizens of Santa Barbara County, he will retire on March 31st, 2023, freeing up his time to spend with his grandkids, Kingston and Veda, play music, go fishing, tinker in his garage, and cruise around the roads he helped maintain in his 1936 Ford pickup truck with his wife Susan. Now, therefore, be it hereby ordered and resolved that this Board of Supervisors of the County of Santa Barbara commends and thanks Mr. Clucker for over 37 years of dedicated service to the county and wishes him and his family the best in his retirement. Passed and adopted today.
Mr. Chair and board members, thank you for honoring Kirk Kluka today. And on behalf of the Public Works Department and the Transportation Division, I want to thank Kurt for his outstanding public service, 37 years worth. As you heard in the resolution, Kurt has been instrumental in the Transportation Division's response and the department's response to numerous federal, state, and local emergencies over his career. And all these gentlemen, Kurt, Glenn, and Andy, were all at the helm of their respective sections this past weekend since January 9th. And as you can tell, they're going to be busy this week. We're going to keep them busy right up to their retirement date, right? So we need that knowledge to stay around. Kurt also provided the balance within the Transportation Division that was needed to ensure that all aspects of problems were analyzed in developing a solution. Some say Kurt has a superpower because he always recognizes when it's time to hit the pause button, take a breath, and systematically work on a solution that balances the needs of the multiple users of our transportation system. No one matches Kurt when it comes to organization, and this is key for Public Works because we rely heavily on historical documents, which provide us with the what, why, and how of why we do things out on the road system. And every time we could count on Kurt to pull the 20-year-old document out of his hat and often require us to change course from the decision we had made originally. So we appreciate that, Kurt. You kept us between the lines, and that's a tough task. So Kurt's overall value in all transportation areas have proven unmatched for the last 37 years. Can't thank him enough for his service, and we wish him a great next chapter with his family. So congratulations, Kurt.
Thank you. Chair Williams, Board, thank you very much for the resolution. It's very much appreciated. Like Glenn said, starting back in '85, never really anticipated getting to this point. It was really kind of a neat time because as us young guys were coming on, the World War II vets of the day were turning 65 in '85 because they were 20 and 45. And getting to get your feet wet with those guys really made a huge impact on me. They could fix anything with a pocket comb and a rock. And I tried to adopt that philosophy the best I could. I do tend to be a paper person, so I'll try and get all that cleaned out before I go, but it's always nice to have a document. So I'd just like to say a couple more words if you don't mind. In roads, we strive to let our work speak for itself, to deliver the best roadway network we can with the resources allotted by the board. Every one of us here today got here on a roadway or walkway, part of a man-made all-weather ribbon of connectivity built over the past 150 years or so and maintained by a team here at the county. I feel privileged to have served that system, that network, for this community, our friends and family, and the commerce this network supports and that we depend on. Thank you again. It's nice to be acknowledged by the board that represents this community. Thank you.
So in the resolution, it says Kurt's known as a straight shooter, and I will attest to that. I just had a couple of stories about Kurt. One was, I think it was my first meeting, it might have been my second meeting. It was here in Santa Maria. I was sitting right there 13 years ago. And I thought I knew what I was talking about, but apparently I didn't. And when the meeting was over, my secretary says, "Hey, Kurt Kluker wants to speak to you." I was like, "Okay, have him come in." And Kurt came in and he very respectfully just basically told me that I didn't know what I was talking about and I should probably get educated on the issue. And I really appreciated it because he was right. It turned out he was right. I was wrong. But the interesting thing about Kurt is about a month after that, I had a town hall at Sisquoc, which I thought was going to be a really good idea. Let's go out and hear what the folks at Sisquoc and Gary have on their mind, which if you don't know that community, you better know what you're doing when you walk in there. And while I started taking a bunch of heat, Kurt was first guy, stepped up, got in the way, and appreciate it, man. Thank you. So I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Steve.
You bet. Okay, let's get to 27.
Mr.
An
Chair,
easy one.
But before we go to 27, I just wanted to chime in support of your resolution. I think all three of these public works employees are emblematic of something that I think is really powerful in the institution. The whole department exhibits an undefeatable can-do attitude, disaster after disaster, prevention project after prevention project, constantly working to ensure the safety of our community. And it really is powerful and something that should be celebrated. And I thank all three of them for providing that example for the employees that come after you.
Yeah, and Scott, either you're doing something right or wrong. So I don't know if there's anybody left in public works, but 100 years out the door. He's doing something very right. We agree. I think Scott is still now the only unelected department head that's been here longer than me. So you've been here a while. All right, let's go to A27, please.
Vice Chair Lavanino and members of the board, that item was administrative.
A28, I'm sorry, A28. A27 was moved.
Administrative item 28.
29. Whatever the one Magnicola is, that's the one we're going to.
Chair Lavanino and members of the board, administrative item number 29 is sponsored by Supervisor Lavanino. It is to adopt a resolution of commendation honoring Chief Deputy District Attorney Magnicola upon his retirement from the District Attorney's Office after over 29 years of faithful and distinguished service to the citizens of Santa Barbara County. Joining us in Santa Maria, we have District Attorney John Savernock and Chief Deputy District Attorney Magnicola. If you will join us at the podium, I will now read the resolution into the record. Whereas Chief Deputy District Attorney Magnicola retired on March 3rd, 2023, after 29 years with the Santa Barbara District Attorney's Office, where he served with excellence as the Deputy District Attorney, Filing Deputy, and Chief Deputy District Attorney. And whereas Mag was the District Attorney's representative in all criminal justice policy meetings and working groups, and served as the point of contact for numerous multi-jurisdictional partnerships for the past 10 years. As a Chief Deputy District Attorney, Mag served as the mentor for Deputy District Attorneys and worked to solidify a remarkable relationship between the District Attorney's Office and our partner law enforcement agencies. Mag was instrumental in improving procedures between Santa Maria Police Department and the District Attorney's Office. He has always made himself available to all law enforcement for guidance and advice. Throughout his tenure with the District Attorney's Office, Mag won every award a county prosecutor could win, from Supervisor of the Year, District Attorney of the Year, the Santa Maria Elks Law Enforcement Appreciation Award, and the prestigious Thomas H. Gurry Award. Whereas Mag helped vigorously prosecute some of the most heinous crimes in Santa Barbara County. 4 defendants who were charged with robbery and murder at the Vandenberg Federal Credit Union and the Slick Gardner case, which was the largest criminal cruelty case, the largest animal cruelty case in the county history. Whereas MAG was monumental in leading our office through new criminal justice reforms and legislative changes while providing invaluable training to dozens of new prosecutors who now have careers with the district attorney's office. Throughout his career, MAG spent countless hours contributing to the office's juvenile law and justice programs, and also spent many hours in the North County schools teaching students about their legal rights and responsibilities. And whereas MAG constantly showed good judgment, professionalism, dedication, and unwavering perseverance, and passion in fighting and preventing crime, and committed his career to working with crime victims, the public, courts, probation, law enforcement, and criminal justice partners to enforce the law while seeking fair and just outcomes. Now, therefore, it is hereby ordered and resolved that this Board of Supervisors commends Chief Deputy District Attorney Magnicola for his faithful and distinguished service to the citizens of Santa Barbara County, congratulates him upon his retirement, and wishes him and his family many years of good health and happiness, passed and adopted today.
Vice Chair Lavanino, members of the board, it's going to be hard for me not to get emotional. In my 30 years in public service, Mag represents the best of all of us. He cares deeply about the mission of his department. He cares deeply about the people that assist him, help him, work with him in carrying out that mission. And most importantly, he cares deeply about the people that we serve. He is a member of this community. He is a proud member of this community. I'm amazed at how he knows everybody or knows somebody that knows everybody, and he truly cares. He is not only a peer, we have worked together. More importantly, he is a friend. And while I will not have the good fortune of having him be a part of my administration moving forward, I would like to read the comments of someone who did see all of his qualities, recognized them, and made him part of her administration for years. Retired District Attorney Joyce Dudley regrets that she was unable to be here today. She did plan on it, but in honor of her good friend, she wanted me to read these comments. I had the honor and absolute pleasure of working with Mag for over 25 years. Although Meg is a brilliant attorney and a very hardworking public servant, I believe it is his heart that has been the biggest gift to our county. Meg cares deeply about the communities he served and his colleagues in the criminal justice system, especially those in law enforcement and the DA's office. Meg's deep caring is what inspired him to work long hours to seek justice for all. In his decades at the DA's office, he has created new programs, garnered significant resources to support the ethical prosecution of defendants, and improved our facilities in the North County offices. Meg has also ensured that those faced with charges are given due process and that crime victims not only got justice, but also the support they needed to grow from victim to survivor. During my tenure as DA, I was frequently in awe of all Meg accomplished without getting nearly the attention he deserved and the attention he always avoided. Our county was indeed blessed to have him play such a critical role in the DA's office for such a long period of arduous times. From Joyce, heartfelt thanks, my friend.
Thank you. Especially thank you Supervisor Lavanino for bringing this attention that I know I didn't want. Very much appreciate it. I want to thank my family, my friends, and in particular, I want to thank Sheriff Brown. I've known Sheriff Brown for almost my entire career, and he's just been a great friend, a good mentor, and a rock solid sheriff, and prior to that, police chief of Lompoc Police Department. It's been such a fun ride. And I thank you from the depth of my soul. It's been very rewarding, and I'm glad I got to experience it here in Santa Barbara County. On a more serious note, I've appeared in front of the board more times than I can count in my capacity with the district attorney's office. I'm free now to say that this is actually the meeting that I've enjoyed. So thank you for that. Thank you very much.
Well, I had talked to Mag's wife, Julie, and said that we were going to go ahead and honor. Sure. Yeah, we're going to honor Mag. And I started, Mag and I playing a legal poker home game. I felt like if I'm playing in this game, if the chief deputy district attorney is in the same game, I think I'm okay. So at one point, Julie called me though and said, "Hey, I said, let's keep it a secret." She said, "Have you talked to Mag about the 14th?" And I said, "No." She said, "Well, I haven't either, but he's now planning a trip to San Diego. So it might be a good idea to actually let him know that we're doing this." So I was glad we were able to surprise you. When I moved back here in 1998, I live over by the courthouse. And I remember I used to see this convertible cruising by and this young guy driving this convertible. And I thought, that guy looks like he's too cool for Santa Maria. Like, who is this guy? And then I finally figured out it was Mag. Then I found out you weren't that cool after we started hanging out. But Mag's got one of those jobs that isn't 9 to 5. When we talk about like a lifetime of service, his is also been a lifestyle of service, because in his job, you miss all those family events. You are at the whim of your job is first. When he's sitting at the table with us, he's got his cell phone out. He's ready for that next call. So, could have made a bunch more money in private service. So we do appreciate your lifestyle of service as well as your lifetime. These jobs also involve the family. I can't imagine how difficult it is to separate, especially in a job like Mag's, where you're seeing things and hearing about things that are traumatic and shocking, and then have to go home and just kind of change your entire personality. It's got to be so difficult. So, not to mention the fact that you're living with the thought too, that you put some of the most heinous, violent criminals away. And in our state, they don't stay there. So some of those folks are also coming out. So Mag, I want to thank you for all the sacrifices you've made for us and for the people of this county. And Brandon and Julie, he is now all yours. So thank you very much, Mag. Appreciate it. Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break before we move on, so you guys can all congratulate each other. Thanks a lot.
We'll call the meeting back to order. This is Doss Williams in South County. And now is the time for members of the public to speak on items that are not on the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any requests to speak on general public comment?
Chair Williams and members of the board, we have no requests to speak.
Then we will proceed to departmental item number 1.
Chair Williams and members of the board, departmental item number 1 is from the County Executive Office. It is a hearing to consider recommendations regarding fiscal year 2022 through 2023 second quarter budget status report and cannabis taxation compliance and enforcement update.
Brittany?
Oh, okay. So this is Paul Clemente up in North County. Good morning, Chair Williams, members of the board. I'm your budget director. Presenting with me down in Santa Barbara for a portion of this is Brittany Heaton for the cannabis division. We also have Stephen Yee up here, and I believe Jeff Frapwell down in Santa Barbara available to answer questions. So today's report will provide an update on the county's financial performance relative to the budget through the second quarter, as well as an update from the Cannabis Division on taxation, compliance, and enforcement activities. As a reminder for this report, we take departments' actual financial information through December 31st, plus projections for the remaining 6 months of the year, and compare that to the adjusted budget for the year. Departments in the general fund that have a projected variance greater than $300,000, positive or negative, receive a write-up in this report explaining the drivers of the variance, as do special revenue funds with variances larger than $500,000. In the general fund, the largest variance is in general revenues, Department 991, where the county receives its discretionary general fund dollars. Similar to what we reported in quarter 1, general revenues is projecting a $23.1 million positive variance, driven mostly by property taxes, which are anticipated to come in around $17 million higher than the adopted budget. This higher 22-23 property tax base was known last quarter when the 5-year forecast was developed and was used as the basis of the revenue in that forecast, as well as the 23-24 budget that we'll be discussing in workshops next month. So this large bump that we're seeing in the 22-23 compared to budget is already baked into the future numbers that we've been discussing and will continue to discuss in April. The variance in property tax revenue is driven by a few factors. Timing of budget development plays a role, with our office getting estimates from the auditor controller around January of each year that we base the upcoming fiscal year's budget off of, while the assessor's office continues to work through the end of June to finalize the tax roll. Anticipated growth in the 22-23 budget was a strong 4.5%, but the finalized roll ended up at 8.1% growth. This was driven by the significant increase in property transfer volume in 21-22, as well as a backlog from the prior fiscal year, resulting in higher reassessed values. In the current year, property transfer volume has substantially slowed compared to the prior 2 years, so the assessor's office does not anticipate seeing that level of assessed value growth again. Adding to this large increase was the assessor's office work in spring of 22 to address a backlog of Prop 8 reassessments. These were assessed values that had been decreased during the Great Recession under Prop 8, whose market values had now risen back to the Prop 13 valuation, but had not yet had the reassessment done. The assessor worked through the remaining backlog of these reassessments by the time the 22-23 roll was completed. But again, after the 22-23 budget numbers had been set. We have confirmed with the assessor that no such backlog remains, so we don't anticipate a similar bump in 23-24. Other drivers of the surplus in general revenues include interest income on the general fund, projecting $2.5 million higher than anticipated due to the interest rate increases we've been seeing over the past year. Transient occupancy tax continues to outperform expectations, projecting over $2 million higher than budgeted, and sales tax may come in around $1 million over budget. Our sales tax consultant, HDL, does caution that the second half of this fiscal year and moving into next year may see some flattening of growth in sales tax, as both inflation and economic uncertainty remain high. This could impact TOT as well. Of course, the one dark spot in general revenues we see on the slide here is the cannabis tax performance, which is projecting over $10 million less than budget, which we'll go over in greater detail later in this presentation. The sheriff's office is projecting a negative variance of just under $400,000, which is 0.02% of their total budget. They have incurred $8.7 million in overtime expenses as of December 31st on an annual budget of $5 million, and at current trends could reach as high as $18 million in overtime for the year. However, most of these overtime costs are being covered by salary savings for now. This deficit could grow larger in the second half of this year if the sheriff starts to see more success filling vacancies because of the substantial time spent training new staff before they can fill post positions, meaning overtime continues to be needed, but the salary savings are no longer there to offset it while new staff is onboarded and trained. This is what we hope to see, however, as we know the levels of overtime currently being worked in the department are unsustainable and are having ripple effects and indirect costs, not just within the department, but increasingly in the time and resources that supporting departments are spending on this issue. In addition to general revenues and the sheriff's office, we had 6 other departments with reportable variances, all positive and all driven by salary savings. They're listed on the slide here. I won't read through each one. And most of the other departments in the general fund, while not reportable, are also anticipating small positive variances. This leads us to a total anticipated positive variance for the general fund of $28.5 million. We still have 2 quarters left, and these numbers may change, but as is our practice, any surplus at the end of the fiscal year is put into fund balanced and used as available one-time funds during the development of the fiscal year 24-25 budget 1 year from now. We have 3 special revenue funds with reportable variances: fire at $3.5 million, and social services in both their social services fund at $1.8 million and in their in-home supportive services fund at close to $800,000. These are all driven by salary savings as well as unanticipated revenue. Fire receives property taxes directly, so the explanation here is similar to what I discussed earlier for general revenues, with fire anticipating property taxes totaling about $2.2 million higher than budget. In both social services funds, 1991 and 2011 realignment revenues from the state received higher increases to their base funding than the department anticipated in their budget, which will allow the department to preserve fund balance for future years. That concludes my piece. I will turn the rest over to Brittany. Brittany, just let us know and we'll move the slides forward.
Thank you, Mr. Clementi, Chair Williams, Board. We also like to give an update on cannabis with the budget report. So we'll talk about gross receipts and some of the actions over the last quarter. As of the filing deadline, which is January 31st for the second quarter, cannabis revenues brought in $1.1 million. We do have an update as of today. We are at $3.1 million. We're up 1.3 from, I'm sorry, $3.5 million looking at Finn yesterday morning. So that means that several operators have since filed since that deadline and paid. On enforcement, the sheriff's office completed 5 enforcement actions against the illegal cannabis market that resulted in confiscating 1,969 plants, 586 pounds of cannabis product with an estimated $1.6 million street value. Our team has issued 14 business licenses over the last quarter. We are looking at the cap. We've talked about the inland cap. That's been reached as in terms of operators with approved land use entitlements and working on their business licenses. We have 14 operators that are actually on the wait list for the inland cap. We have not yet reached the cap in Carpinteria. We're about 28 acres away from the 186 acre maximum there. And on that sunset date for legal non-conforming operators that we had on December 31st, we had a deadline for the operators in the inland area to have a business license or cease, or actually be pulled off of the wait list. We had one operator that wasn't able to make that deadline and has been taken off the eligibility list, and that acreage was offered to someone on the wait list. Next slide, please. Talking a little bit about the decline in gross sales receipts, there has been a significant drop in the wholesale pricing, and the industry tells us, when we read the periodicals and various resources, that there's a severe supply glut, and so there's just too much product in California and not enough outlet for it. So the price per pound, I just given kind of an estimation. We saw an example of the prices per pound dropped by 35 to 40% on average. If you look at the Q2 in 21-22 over the Q2 in 22-23, these are numbers from national averages, but we can apply that here in California as well, I think, when you look at our revenues. On enforcement, it continues, but there's also a continued evolution of the illegal market. These folks that have been involved in the market haven't, on the illegal side, haven't gone away, and their methods for providing product in the illegal market are evolving. We're seeing more indoor grows that are harder to detect, especially up in some of the larger warehouses in the North County. Some attrition has also contributed to the lack of revenue. We've had 12 operators drop out for various reasons. Their lack of capital, that was 3 operators. We had some compliance issues where we issued notices of noncompliance, and the operators were unable to get into compliance, mainly because of also lack of capital. It was going to involve some infrastructure investments that they weren't willing to do, and so we had 2 operators drop out due to that. And then on board policies, that sunset date that I mentioned in the last slide, we had 5 operators that didn't make it onto the eligibility list back on June 30, and then we've had 2 operators that had to cease operations. And so that's a total of 12 operators just due to attrition. And when we looked at the numbers of what those operators were paying in tax revenue, it over the beginning of the program, because many of them were legal non-conforming operators, they paid in about 12% of the total revenues. And then on timing, so when we have to project revenues, we looked at all of the operators that were in process for getting their business licenses, and we had to estimate when they were going to come online, and that's difficult to do. And so I think we may have overestimated in some areas of how many operators are going to come online based on the process and also the market. Next slide, please. This slide just gives you an overall view of the change in revenue from the beginning of the program in 18-19. We brought in $6.76 million in 18-19, and then we had some increases of 45% in 19-20. In our high water mark in 2021, we went up another 23%. We were at $15.7 million. And then last year, fiscal 21-22, we started to see that decline. We went down 81% to $8.7 million. And then this year, our estimated actual, so this is an estimate based on the first 2 quarter filings of around $5.8 million. That we're looking at about $7 million for 23-24. So we do expect to see an increase next year, but not at the same rates that we were seeing in the earlier years of the program. Next slide, please. And then here there are several numbers on this slide that I won't read all to you, but what we wanted to demonstrate, and in the following slide we have a graphic to complement these numbers, is that over time we've brought in increased revenue up through 2021, and we also had expenditures, but not at the rate that we had anticipated. So we had a lot of carryover. And so our ending balances are fairly high. I mean, in 21-22, we're at $13.5 million of carryover. And so we are able to address the program costs as well as all of the ongoing allocations and one-time allocations that the board designated. For 22-23, we anticipate even with revenues being down to 5.7, that we'll see an ending balance this year, this fiscal, of $4.6 million. Next slide, please. Here's the graphic, just to complement that. The two orange colors are the one-time, the light orange is the one-time allocations. The dark orange are enforcement and administration. So the dark orange, that's the constant, that's the cost of what the program takes in staffing and resources. And you can see that's pretty stable. The gray color is the non-cannabis ongoing allocations. These are allocations that the board had designated for various staffing in planning, long-range planning, libraries. There's a attachment to your board letter that lists many of the, or all of them, in fact. And then the light orange are the one-time allocations for the open spaces, general fund to maintenance for parks and roads. And that has increased over time with our revenues going up. And so you can see, though, the blue line now shows our revenue stabilizing, then coming down. And so along with the carryover. And so if that trend continues, obviously we're going to run into an issue where we're not able to cover those costs. Next slide, please. Finally, we just wanted to go over the numbers in a little more detail for this current fiscal year, so that to be clear about what our ongoing cost is for the program. We broke it down into 3 different buckets. We have permitting, and that's on the planning side for operators to get their land use entitlements. We have business licensing and program administration, and then we have compliance and enforcement. And so in Table 1, we show the revenues that go toward those various programs, and FTEs are full-time equivalents. So we're talking about the number of employees, full-time employees that are dedicated to the various programs. And in Table 1, it shows the revenues that pay for those full-time equivalents. And so you can see that in permitting, there are 10 full-time equivalents, but those are paid for with permitting fees that the applicants pay to planning and development. Business license fees pay for 3.2 FTEs, and then the cannabis tax revenue picks up that 17.1, and that is for a total of 30.3. And those cannabis tax revenues cover those employees as well as the soft costs for lease. We have a sheriff lease agreement. We have the cost to the California Cannabis Authority. We have the cost for the HDL tax work, as well as our Acela program. So that's what's captured in some of those ongoing costs. And then in Table 2, we break down how many FTEs are associated with each of the programs. So you still get to the 30.3, but in Table 1, we wanted to demonstrate the revenue that goes toward those positions, and then in Table 2, what those positions, which program those positions are allocated toward. And I believe that is, yes, thank you. I'll turn it back to Mr. Clementi for the recommended action.
Sure. So on the slides, we see recommended actions A and B just to receive and file, as well as make the CEQA determinations. And that concludes the presentation. We're available for questions.
Any questions from board members?
Chair Williams, I have a question.
Mr. Nelson.
Yes, thank you. I was just curious about that revision in the Q2 estimate. Seemed like it went from, you said from 1.1, I believe, to 3.5. Ms. Heaton?
It went, I'm sorry, it was the change. We collected 1.1 by the end of the filing deadline. So the quarter ends on December 31st, and operators have until January 31st to file for Q2. When I looked in Fin yesterday, we were up from 1.1 million to 3.5 million in collections.
And that was through Q2. So there was an additional 2.4 million in late.
Yeah, and that,
filings?
correct. And we can assume most of it's Q2, but some of it may be even left over from prior quarters of revenue that was due.
And the reason why I wanted to get some clarification there is because it seems like that may change the projections. And I know that that's pretty new information. So are there some revisions that we might see to the projections from that increase? I mean, that's a 200% increase from what it was at the end of Q1 or Q2. So
I can speak to that, Supervisor Nelson, through the chair. So to clarify the numbers we're talking about through December 31st and then collections through January 31st. So for the 2 quarters of collections, we had received $2.2 million as a whole for the first 6 months of the year. That's what we base the projections on we're talking about here. And since then, delinquent payments have come in totaling another $1.3 million. So that is something that is new information, and we will be using that and possibly updating our forecasting and things when we come back in April to discuss cannabis at the workshops.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Lavanino.
Thank you. It's about the property tax and the timing. This, I mean, it's nice that we came in 17 million over. That's awesome. And so I don't really complain about the timing too much. But if that was reversed and we were 17 million in the hole, that's going to be a little bit of a budget breaker. So is there any strategies, or, I mean, you've been doing this a while. What could we do different so that we actually end up with a number that is kind of in the ballpark of, and I know this was kind of an outlier, but is there any recommendations that you could make that would give us a little more certainty of the number that we're getting?
Supervisor, through the chair, we definitely note this, outlier this year, and it's a big one. And we have on our end, our office has stepped up communication with the assessor's office, and will continue to do so. We're talking to them at least once a month now as they continue to work through their roll information and finalizing that roll. So monthly updates from them, and if they see significant movement one way or the other, as we continue to talk to your board in April or even by June, if there's significant movement, we can bring updates within the budget process there.
Okay, thank you. And then one other thing I just want to have staff maybe take a look at, maybe this is for Nancy, is that as we get to the budget workshops, there were things that we added as board members to the cannabis fund that had nothing to do with cannabis, and you kind of detailed some of those out. There's specific positions maybe inside departments that have nothing to do with cannabis, but we had extra money at the time, so we decided that's where the money was going to come from. It would be nice to kind of come up with some sort of a strategy that those departments now that are coming back with, that are showing that they have an excess, that somehow they buy back that position out of the cannabis revenue fund, so that it's actually, I think it's just better budget mechanics, actually, so that, I mean, I was always a strong supporter of one-time revenues for that cannabis fund, and we ended up kind of getting out of that. But I mean, if somebody's got something, let's say in a totally different department, and they also now have an exceedance, it would be nice to just kind of fold that back into their actual budget. Can you comment on that?
Thank you. Supervisor Lavanino, through the chair. So as Mr. Colonti had mentioned, we are bringing back an item for the workshops, and those are exactly the type of things that we're looking at. If you recall, your board had in 21-22 had kind of directed us in a way to ensure that if we identify any ongoing resources, to swap those out. And we actually did that in 22-23. All of the public safety ongoing commitments, we moved those over to Prop 172, so they had an ongoing source that was not cannabis. So those are exactly the things that we'll be looking at as we take it to that workshop discussion and have some recommendations for your board so that we can kind of resolve this prospectively as much as we can, at least on the ongoing commitment piece.
Excellent. Thank you. And then just a question for Brittany. Do we have a timeline on, I'm not sure what retail has opened and what retail hasn't opened, or what's scheduled to open, and if we've got a plan on.
Thank you, Supervisor Lavanino, through the chair. As of today, we have 2 retail that are open, one in Santa Ynez and one in Isla Vista. And we have 2 more that are in the building permit process. So we anticipate them coming online fairly soonish. That's part of the us trying to, to forecast when these are going to open. But ultimately we will have 6, but today we have 2.
And those 2 that you stated are in building cycle. What are those 2 locations?
Orchid and the Upper State Street, Eastern Goleta Valley.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all my questions.
And Chair Williams, I had some questions as well.
Is Supervisor Hartman?
Thank you. My first question has to do with enforcement actions. Of the 5 that you described, how many are failure to comply with permit, and how many are black market unpermitted? Do we break it down? Do we have that information?
Supervisor Hartman, through the chair, I believe that Sergeant Banks is online from the sheriff's office and can give us more information on those enforcement actions. Is
That would be helpful, and just
Okay.
a better understanding of how the black market is evolving. You alluded to that, and I'd like to understand that better.
If I know they were on Storm Watch. Oh, okay, there. Thank you.
Yes, Supervisor Hartman through the chair. This is Matt Banks with the Sheriff's Department, and we of the 5 you referenced, all of those are of the illicit market variety. Nothing from those 5 stemmed from a compliance aspect, if that answers your question.
Okay, so they're all black market. And could you talk a little bit about the evolution of the black market? How people are, I assume, avoiding enforcement action, and how you're keeping up with them?
Yes, we're seeing, as Ms. Heaton said, we're seeing a movement towards more indoor grows. Last year, we only saw a handful of outdoor grows. The indoor grows are obviously harder to identify, so it slows the process some. We did fly the county several times throughout last year and did not find a lot of the outdoor grows. And then we are still seeing the street level dealers, and when we have those, we obviously try and follow up to identify sources, but that's the main avenues we're seeing right now.
And are there any things people should be looking for with indoor grows? Are there any telltale signs?
As far as like citizens that can report to us, is that what you're?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes they start with citizen tips, and that's just people knowing their neighborhoods and their communities and seeing something that doesn't seem right and reaching out to us either anonymously through the website or directly through calling the sheriff's department and giving us the places to look. As far as what to look for, it kind of goes hand in hand with all sale of illicit drugs, in that you see maybe traffic that's out of the ordinary for a house you live near, and you're seeing an increase in traffic, or people that are coming at weird hours, or just kind of something that's not the normal for your neighborhood and community.
And then I had one more question. Of these enforcement actions, most of which were unpermitted black market, how many are referred for criminal prosecution?
All 5 of the ones we handled, I believe, in the last quarter were referred to the district attorney's office for prosecution. The majority of what we do on the enforcement side gets referred to the district attorney's office for prosecution.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I had some more general questions as well. And the next one has to do with planning and development. And much of their work has been getting these operators permitted, and we recover the costs there. But what happens, I mean, I think we're going to have to move increasingly towards compliance. And I just wondered how that was funded.
Supervisor Hartman, Chair Williams, I believe that Director Plowman is on the line.
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
So our compliance, we do charge fees for our compliance work. So they're covered by that.
And could you elaborate a little bit more how, and is it enough? And
so we do.
How active is it?
Right. So we do currently have a fee when somebody has an application, and whether it's cannabis or non-cannabis, they have a compliance fee that we pay and that we bill against when we determine their compliance with their permits. And so that's a common thing that's required for all discretionary permits that we have at the county.
If you could elaborate a little bit more, because a lot of things are they're done. You build a building and you comply and it's over. Cannabis is ongoing. So how do you do that?
So yes, Supervisor Hartman through the chair. So in these particular projects, there are conditions that have to be met. So that's the first phase of it, right? So we have compliance staff that's reviewing plans, making sure that they followed everything that they did. And that's your first phase of your compliance. The rest of the work that we do, if there's an issue, usually it will come through a complaint. So if it's a year or two down the road and perhaps they're not following their conditions any longer, then that would be complaint driven.
And so I'm very interested, excuse me, I'm very interested in how we move from complaint driven, putting this responsibility on the community, to an ongoing compliance for ongoing operations through P&D, and how we would pay for that.
So that is something that has been looked at in the past, and I believe that issue was brought to the board prior to my return, maybe in 2018. And we can certainly take a look at what that would cost, but that I believe would result in some additional, and I would need to coordinate with Paul Cometti on this, some additional general fund allocation towards if we were going to be doing proactive enforcement, meaning we were driving around and going out and checking things, and rather than responsive to complaints.
Yeah, well, I'm very interested in seeing that come back, perhaps in budget workshops. I think I've been a voice all along saying that for this, we really should bear the burden of enforcement ourselves, the county, and not expecting community members to do this. And there's security around these operations. It's very difficult. How do we know that they're the acreage that they say? How do we know that they're growing, harvesting only 2 or 3 times a year and within the periods that we say? I mean, these are the things that we put in place to try to deal with some of the nuisance impacts of these operations. And if we have no way really to oversee that, it seems to me that we're being very irresponsible. So I do have a keen interest in how we have a more proactive compliance effort and what that would cost, and how some of the, if the cost can be put on to the industry rather than to P&D. I have 2 more questions. The other is, I know that we have a consortium that we pay for that was basically to supplement or better understand the track and trace so that we could collect monies. And we didn't take on, we didn't push this cost to the industry last budget cycle, but I'd be very, I think there was agreement that they should bear the cost, and so I think they should. So that's just another flag for the upcoming budget. And my final question is, the retail cannabis, all of them had a community benefit portion in their application. And I'm just interested at some point in hearing how those are working.
Supervisor Hartman, through the chair, it's Mona in Santa Barbara. And on that question about the cannabis, the CCA, maybe we can talk about it more at workshops. We heard your concerns and we'll make sure those are addressed, but also Brittany or Mr. Frappel can answer it in Santa Barbara.
Thank you, Supervisor Hartman, Chair Williams. We are in the process of updating and looking at our fees for cannabis licensing. And so when we bring those fees to you, we can look at the cost of the CCA membership and how that would translate to our operators as one of the options as a surcharge. We can break it out and we can consider that when we bring our fee update.
And
Thank
Mr.
you. I
Frappel,
would be interested.
Mr. Frappel, could you just remind us why we didn't do that at the beginning?
Thank you, Chair Hartman. I mean, Supervisor Hartman and board members. So it's an interesting conversation we've had, which with respect to how do we allocate that CCA membership, or actually that access to metric information across all of our industry partners. I think that initially we can only are taxing and licensing those that have made it all the way through the process. There were a number of operators that were operating with provisional license from the state, but not yet completed the county's permit process. So if I'm just looking quickly at Table 6, included in your board packet. And what that does, that Table 6 shows you kind of where we are with respect to business license issued by the county. If you look at the second column, which is the total of business license issued, is 76. That's up from 62 in the prior quarter, but there's still 93 that are in process. And so if we were to try to recoup the cost of the CCA membership across a smaller population, it disadvantages those that have made it all the way through our permit process. It advantages those that are still in the provisional state license. So our objective is to get everybody into a county permit process. That means they're in an application process, issuance process, and then a renewal process. And that gives us the mechanism to adequately and appropriately spread the membership cost across all the participants. So as Ms. Heaton mentioned, this conversation is very timely. Both this conversation with respect to the CCA membership allocation, as well as your prior comment, Supervisor Hartman, about the cost of proactive compliance in the planning department. We could look at both of those, and when we bring back to your board the discussion of updating the fees for licenses, renewals, and issuance, and we'll be happy to include that discussion in that board item.
Thank you.
Supervisor Capps.
Thank you, Chair Williams. Thank you to the staff. It's obviously wonderful news, encouraging that property taxes are up 17 million and that TOT tax is up 2 million, even without, here in South County, the Biltmore. I know there's no way to know what the TOT for the Biltmore is, but I imagine it was quite significant. So I just wanted to ask a question first about TOT funds, which are $17 million. Fairly encouraging if this is, you think about just the fact that it's only in the unincorporated parts of our county. I'm curious if we can explain a bit about how TOT funds are spent, please.
Supervisor Capps, through the chair. So TOT and all these other general, like property tax and everything that we've been discussing in that department, they all come in and are a sum total number that gets dispersed out to the departments as general fund contribution. So each specific line item from property tax to sales tax to TOT, all of those come in, and it's a total number that is then dispersed out as the general fund contribution. Cannabis is the one exception to that, in that we have been segregating that because it was a new revenue source with a lot of volatility, as we've seen, and just uncertainty surrounding it. So we have been segregating that in a fund balance and then dispersing it out of there as it comes in, which lets us better track and adjust for that revenue when it's coming in short, as we're seeing in the past year or two.
Thank you. So just so I understand, so TOT tax, which is hotel and bed tax, isn't segmented out the same way that cannabis program is listed out.
Supervisor, that's correct.
I'd like to request that in the future it could be, or otherwise, I mean, I just want to understand a bit, from the general fund, that would mean that TOT tax, property tax goes to libraries, goes to fight climate change, goes to these other issues that are listed out by segment in the cannabis program. Is that correct?
Supervisor, broadly speaking, that would be correct, but it's just not possible for us to really say these, because these revenues have been coming in for decades into the county. They grow incrementally each year, and it's that increment that gets, if it's $5 million one year, that $5 million gets dispersed out as a single GFC amount to the various departments. I don't know that we would be able to have any way of going back and carving that out as a separate item in the future, as far as where specifically that's going. But it funds all county discretionary operations.
Okay, I appreciate that it's not possible to do that, but I just want to make the sort of broader point that if with cannabis revenues way down, that people might interpret that as that these services that they care about are threatened. But given the uptake in the other coffers, so to speak, we're looking pretty good. I just wanted to kind of convey that point. Is that an accurate assessment?
Certainly. And go ahead, Mona.
No, I was saying yes, and I think that we'll have that discussion fully at budget workshops so that the board can see that. But I think it goes to what Supervisor Lavanino had said earlier, which is if we're doing better in other revenues or general fund revenues, should that be quote unquote sort of taking the place of the cannabis revenue that's been funding some of these things? So I think you both are kind of saying the same thing.
Yeah, I appreciated Supervisor Lavanino's question on that. So then I want to ask about the cost of the program, because I have many concerns about just the fiscal cost, but also just the resources that it takes this county. And to see the number, I was pretty surprised to see that it's 30 full-time staff that are actually working on this program. I understand that it's paid for by cannabis, but just barely this last year, if that's accurate. So $5 million to administer the program and 5.7 in tax revenue. So you have the staff sort of listed out here, but I'd love to expound, if you could expound on this. I'm not sure quite who this question is directed towards, of which departments does that draw from the most? We heard from the sheriff, we've heard DA, I understand has one, but I would like to have a better sense of where are those staff people working on cannabis throughout our county?
Thank you, Supervisor Capps, through the chair. Depending on the program, we can start with permitting. That's planning and development. And those are, again, all paid for with permitting fees. So those would all be case planners and at least one supervising planner. In the business license and administration area, that covers the CEO's office. So there's myself, and I have 2 department business specialists that process business licenses. And then in enforcement, that's where the bulk of these positions are, and that is the district attorney's office. Sheriff has the most positions. In enforcement, they have 5. And actually in business licensing, they have 2, so a total of 7 and then we have county counsel because of the appeals that we're seeing on the permit side, as well as the cases for that the operators are bringing against us. There were some of those. And then all the departments that are involved in business licensing get a portion of the license fees, and those are paid for. So we have the Ag and the Department of Ag Commissioner's Office. We have EHS, Environmental Health, as well as Sustainability Division has a small portion. And then, so I think that covers most of the departments. Fire is the other one. They go through with the licensing as well. So I don't, it's really spread throughout many departments. I think there's a total of 9 that it touches. And of course, the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office, we have 2 positions there. Sorry, I forgot those. So it's 9 different departments, with the Sheriff's Office having a majority, if you're looking at peer numbers.
Thank you, Ms. Heaton. And I just want to, it's good to kind of understand the breadth of the program and how it really is so spread out, as you said, but matched with a worker shortage just raises alarm bells with me of not just the cost of this, of 30 people, but also the opportunity cost. What are we not doing because folks are working on a program that is proven to be much more complicated than anyone anticipated? So I just am curious if our budget projections are so far off this last fiscal year, are we considering a reduction in that 30, in those costs? At the same time, I understand the need for, as Supervisor Hartman talked about, more aggressive compliance. So it's a real rub because we want to have a stronger program, but I just want to restate my concern that this is occupying a lot of people's time at the expense, perhaps, of other more pressing issues that impact more people in our county. So I want to actually get to the fact, part of your presentation here referred to this severe glut in the market. I'm trying to understand, get my head around the black market and where we are. And I think it's accurate that we still have about 22% of all of the license in the state of California, yet barely 2% of the land. So, Humboldt County, by comparison, is 19% of the licenses. So I just want to ask this sincerely: are we a cause of the glut? A cause?
Thank you, Supervisor Capps, through the chair. I suppose you could say we're contributing. I mean, we produce product that is part of the glut. I think I would say that not being able to ship the product across state lines is probably our biggest issue in California, and it's an issue countrywide, right? Because we have various states that have legalization, and we're stuck. And so, are we contributing? I suppose yes, but along with all the other counties that are producing cannabis. We do hold a number of state licenses, the most in the state right now. We kind of go back and forth with Humboldt County, and that's mainly due to the size of our operations, right? Because the state licenses are broken down into really small increments. So it doesn't necessarily equate to the total number of operators. And in fact, they hold state licenses, and we see many of our operators aren't producing right now. So that's I guess, yes, is the final answer. We are contributing, but along with all the other counties where cultivation is legal and happening.
Thank you. Well, I just want to now shift to, because I do think this is a pause for reflection of with these numbers of just 5 million in revenue, 5.7 million last year. And I want to talk about enforcement and the fact that related to taxes, because that's what our presentation's on today. And I've watched this board, my now colleagues as a constituent, really show a lot of outrage Supervisor Williams, all of them, about the fact that so many of our operators are not paying taxes still, 5 years in. I understand there was a lot to work out at the beginning, but now we're 5 years in and we still have, I think, roughly 40% of operators either aren't reporting, according to the presentation, aren't reporting or reporting zero. So I have a lot of concerns about that. And I know that my colleagues share those concerns, but I don't see that changing. And I watched the board meeting last May 2022 when you all spent a good amount of time trying to figure out, should we change the tax system to make it more equitable? We had two supervisors who were advocating for that, and the decision was to keep it sort of status quo, but to have these audits happening so that we could figure out why some operators aren't paying, why some are good actors, some aren't, and then we'd learn from the audits and come back 6 months later to inform this board as to how we can be better at making sure that everyone who is operating is at least reporting and ideally reporting more. So my first question on this line is, do we have a sense of how much revenue we're missing out on? And when I say we, it's the people who are missing out on this revenue. Do we have any sense of ballpark of, if we took in 5 million last year, should that have been 8? Should that have been 10? Should that have been 12? I know it might be impossible for you to answer that specifically, but I do think it's really an important point when we look at these numbers.
Thank you, Supervisor Capps. I think that is a difficult question to answer, and I think the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office has some idea based on the tax ordinance and the taxable transfers and what they're seeing in the reporting. I don't know what that number is today that we're missing out on. I know we've talked about maybe half, but I think we could get you a rough estimate based on the work we're doing now, and that is, you mentioned the operators that are not reporting. When we give you this report, it's at the filing deadline, and so post deadline, unfortunately, we do have people that file late, and so those numbers go down. And so we had 16 that didn't report in this report, but now we're down to 12. And each quarter, the various operators that don't report change. It's kind of like whack-a-mole, right? We don't have one operator that's just not reporting over and over and over again, because that would be a compliance issue we would address and we take care of. So I think that's where this gets tricky. As far as the zero reporting, we are now, with the data that we have from the CCA, we're able to see the transfers in metric, in track and trace. So we can actually go back to an operator that reported zero when we see transfers and say, look, it looks like you had taxable transfers. You reported them in track and trace. You reported them in metric. So this zero reporting doesn't make sense to us. It looks wrong. Come back and fix it. Sometimes there's a reason, and they weren't in fact taxable transfers, and other times we catch that. And so we're starting to do that, and we're starting to see more revenue as a result of that. But as far as a number, I don't have that today, but I can get you something.
Thank you. Is it possible to have a list of the operators who are not paying taxes?
Supervisor Capps, we can't give you a list of operators that aren't paying taxes. We could get you a number of operators that have been reporting zero, and then and possibly then a list of those who we've followed up with because we saw taxable transfers versus those that reported zero legitimately. We have people who report zero because they're not growing many, it's cyclical and seasonal, and so we have that ebbs and flows.
Yeah, I appreciate. I mean, I just, again, for comparison's sake, although it's not perfect, then on the other hand, you have your TOT tax where we wouldn't be okay with hotels that just weren't paying one quarter and then they did pay the next. I do think we need to understand that to the public, this is rather confusing. They pay their taxes. by and large, they play by the system, and this system is very opaque, and it seems like there's leniency that I just can't get my finger on how we fix that. So I'm really interested. I want to move to enforcement.
Supervisor Capps, I just want, want to make a point. We have estimates that somewhere between 1/3 and 50% of our STRs do not pay taxes. So to your point, we have a large body of TOT that we have not been successful at forcing to pay taxes. And we do have outrage about it, but it is a far larger percentage than what we see in the cannabis industry.
Another thing to fix. So I just want to understand what happens to an operator who isn't paying, and I understand you have a better understanding now of, you can trace and you can sort of see metrics, but have any of the licenses been revoked? I heard about the 5 seizures, but that's related to black market cannabis. Have any licenses been actually revoked here in Santa Barbara County because of lack of compliance on tax revenue?
Thank you for that question, Supervisor Capps. To date, we haven't had any revocations due to non-compliance of tax payment. However, we currently have our first lien that we've submitted a letter of non-compliance, we being the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office. And so there is a due process that has to be gone through, and it's in the tax ordinance. And so the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office will follow that process, and then and give the operator a time frame, as we would with any taxpayer. And so if that time frame isn't met, then my office would look at it, would complementary at the same time, right? We'd say, okay, and we'll revoke your business license because you're unable to pay. We also have the renewal process each year. And so as operators come up for renewal, we will not renew a license if someone has back taxes that they owe and need to pay. The last office that reviews and issues the license is the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office, and so they have to sign off on those renewals. What happens often is there are back taxes that need to be paid, and guess what? They come in and pay them because they want their license renewed. And so there's a delay, but we haven't had to revoke to date, but we would, and we do have the ability to do that.
Good, I think that's an important message. And along the lines of the meeting last year, on May 17th, again, the lessons learned from audits, can you speak to the reviews that have been happening? What are we learning, or can we bring that back at another time? Because I don't believe it was brought back to the previous board that I've just joined.
Thank you, Supervisor Capps. So the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office did complete the first phase of a review with HDL, and they're moving into a second phase. They are looking at individual operators and reviewing how and whether they've been compliant with the tax ordinance, and they're following up with individual letters to those operators and reaching out around the taxable transfers. Specifically, we had a lot of misunderstanding between a taxable transfer between a nursery and a cultivation within the same operation, and whether you needed to pay and report a tax on those transfers. And so those operators, we're working through that, and they're working with those operators. As far as individual technical audits, I would need to defer to the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office to talk about what that'll look like in the next steps. They're not, I don't believe they're here today to answer that question, but we can follow up on that. I believe on May 17th, one of the things we talked about was we could come back with some ordinance amendments to the tax ordinance and to Chapter 50, anything that might help strengthen or clarify what's going on with taxes. And so right now we haven't determined that the language needs to change. It's pretty clear. It's just how it was being interpreted or not being followed. And so today, that's what we're doing. We're making sure that everyone understands the language and is following it. And so if there is additional language changes that need to occur, we can bring those back to the board. But at this time, we didn't see a need to make any changes to the actual ordinance.
Thank you. My final point is just that, you know, with revenues being way off, almost 100% off from what was projected, to me that is a wake-up call for changes, a pretty loud and clear one. And I know the intentions were for this, for the revenue. That was the reason for this program. And I'm just questioning, you know, what it's living up to and what tools we have within this body, within this board, to make the changes to make sure that people are paying their taxes, that we're actually bringing in revenue, and this system, this cannabis industry program that we're running is actually working for more people. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Lavanillo.
I'd like to answer some of those things, please. So either misinformation is being put out there on purpose to mislead people, or I think needs to be more education, because some of the things that were said were just either not, they're just not true. You can't take 30 people that are working in the cannabis program, and if we get rid of the cannabis program and take away all the revenue, they're magically going to go work somewhere else in the county, and that's going to be great. So trying to tell people, the taxpayer, that we have these 30 people that are kind of wasting time on cannabis, but it could be over working in your library or working some other issue in the county, is just not true. If the cannabis revenue goes away and you remove the program, those 30 people aren't working here anymore. That's just the way it goes. The only people that would still be here would be the sheriff's enforcement program, which is how this all got started, because we had an illegal market out there, and we said, you know what, we got to bring in some revenue to pay for the enforcement. So if you get rid of the program, you still have the problem. You just don't have the revenue to deal with it. And so, yes, the revenue is down, but guess what? Since 2019, TOT's brought in $49 million to this county. Cannabis has brought in $43 million to the county. So we're talking about getting rid of a program. I don't remember anybody coming in here in 2014, 2013, when TOT was down and going, hey, maybe we should get rid of the TOT program. No. With 4,300 people working at the county, 30 of them are working on cannabis, and it's paid for by the cannabis growers. So I think I don't know. I think we're taking like campaign issues and trying to bring them to the board and start changing policy when we're seeing a lull in, well, first off, our retail centers aren't even open yet. And we are seeing a lull in the tax revenue. But I don't think that's a reason to all of a sudden, hey, we're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The problem we had in this county, which I expressly pointed out, was don't take this. This is a volatile. We didn't know anything about it. We still don't know that much about it. It's volatile. The revenues are volatile. Sometimes they were way up, and we really that's another thing. When revenue was way over our projections, I didn't see anybody coming in and going, man, we got to add a bunch more people and let's do a bunch more things. It's up, it's down. Right now it's down. So it's, I guess, an easy target. But let's remember where it's been and where we had projected to go. So it's another revenue source almost as strong as TOT. And to tell people that these 30 people are kind of wasting their time on cannabis when we could be doing something else with them is just misleading.
Chair Williams.
Supervisor Capps.
Supervisor Lavanillo, you put up.
Can I just, for all parties, I just want to remind you that the agendized item is a second quarter budget update. It is not all cannabis policy. That is not what we have agendized. So can we try to limit it to the fiscal matters that are right in the report?
Absolutely. And Supervisor Lavanillo put quite a few words in my mouth. I'll keep it to the agenda item, and I just feel as though this revenue update, the fact that the program only came in at $5 million, and that is about as much as it costs for us to operate it, is a wake-up call. and that we need to be looking at changes. No one's talking about ending, but we do need to be looking at changes. The status quo fiscally is not working. If you had a business, we're part of your business, and this is a business. We are running the taxpayers' business here in Santa Barbara County. If part of your business was operating nearly 100% under what was projected, you would take a serious look at how we can do better. That's what I'm proposing.
Well, I will just briefly add a couple things to this. First, I would just wonder, I think it's a fair question, Supervisor Capps, but it would also be a fair question to then ask you if revenue bounces back to 7 million or 8 million, whether you will support the program if that logic follows through to whether it's successful as projected. Just something to think about. I don't need an answer immediately, but what I do want to point out also to Supervisor Lavanino's point, we now have a robust black market enforcement. Though we have a large share of the legal market, we have a much smaller share of the market overall. It is not just those counties that have permitted legal cannabis that are contributing to the glut. It's a vast black market controlled by some of the smartest and most nefarious people on the globe, and it's not easy to knock out. We will not solve this by just ending legal cannabis, because the glut in the market, a large percentage of it is the black market. I want to go back to Supervisor Hartman's points, because I do think, though I don't share her opinion of the pejorative about existing enforcement, which I actually think is far more robust than anything that existed pre-program. I do agree that we need to invest in proactive enforcement. And even if that runs the danger of being criticized, because then we are using more of the revenue for the actual program. And the reason is because when there is a point in the market like this, there are people getting away with black market activity, the danger is the temptation for people who are playing by the rules to stop playing by the rules, right? And so I do think that Supervisor Hartman's point on proactive enforcement is very, very necessary. I do not think it should be, we should attempt to get it, for the reasons that Mr. Frapwell articulated, out of permit revenue. We should get it, at least for the next couple of years, out of the cannabis tax. It is worth it. It's worth an investment to make people stick by the rules. I believe good public policy punishes vice and rewards virtue. Most of the time, regulatory environments often punish virtue, i.e. the people who are paying by the rules, and reward vice by not having good enough enforcement. And I think it's just incumbent upon us to make this work and to fight the black market. We need a system that punishes vice and rewards virtue, rewards playing by the rules. Is there any public comment?
Chair Williams, actually,
Mr. Nelson,
had a couple comments and a couple questions. I know we're not agendized to talk about the tax and reforming that today, but it does seem like this board at some point now, that's a new board, that we might have that discussion. It may be a difficult hill to climb. That includes taking the current language back to the voters, and that is a pretty huge burden and a sell that might take place if the board wanted to go another direction. It's something I have been interested in the past, and I may be interested in the future, but I think that that's a conversation that needs to happen with the board, with the community, and with the industry to figure out what that looks like. I'm not looking to, as just kind of signal, I just want a more transparent system. The gross receipts is very volatile, and it's also sometimes hard to understand and prove out. And the problem that I think Supervisor Capps and others have expressed is it's really hard to understand. And when a industry that is in the past seem to have been in the gray or the black. It's, there's a lack of trust there. And I actually would think that a more transparent tax scheme would be benefit to everybody involved. It might also create some more consistent revenue projections for the county, because they'd be able to see what is actually being produced out there and be able to look at their numbers and go from there. But again, that's a conversation for another time. I just wanted to get my position on the record. And I also wanted to clarify and ask Supervisor Hartman, when your question about code enforcement and proactive code enforcement, that was specific to cannabis, right? That wasn't across the board, because I think that Director Plowman's response to you was kind of looking at what that might look like countywide for all compliance, because that's a much bigger discussion.
It's for cannabis and short-term rentals.
Okay, yeah, and then those are things that I also support as well. So I just want to put that out there, because I don't want this to turn into a massive expansion of our police powers within planning on all enforcement and compliance. So I wanted to make sure I understood where you were coming from. My other question for Ms. Heaton is with the retail cannabis. I know there was so much of a clock once somebody got awarded a license that they had to open at a certain period of time or get their retail license going, because I know that there was a time frame. And I mean, some of these places don't even have a building yet. I know that's in Los Alamos in particular. And so I'm kind of curious if any of those projects, if they're kind of slowly going through the process now that they feel that they have their awardee, their license, and they're not really working towards getting open because maybe they're worried about the market and some of the costs that are involved with that, or maybe trying to sell it now that they have this as an entity or a product that they might be able to flip or maybe transfer. Can you speak a little bit to those timeframes on opening up some of these cannabis retail locations?
Chair Williams, Supervisor Nelson, yes, there were timelines associated with submitting for the first phase, which was their land use entitlement. And then once that was approved, they had a timeline to submit a business license application. And so to date, all of the retail operations have met the deadlines that apply to them. In Los Alamos's case, they need to go to the Planning Commission, and my understanding is that is scheduled for April because that is a discretionary permit.
Okay, thank you. And my last question was for Mr. Banks within the enforcement side. I had some questions. I know we're going after the illicit grows, but one of my big concerns has always been the illegal delivery services, especially those selling to minors. I know that's very robust in our county. I know we had a operation that we did last year to go after one of them. These things are very prevalent, and I think that I would love to see a more significant investment in going after those who are illegally selling cannabis to our kids in our community. I think that that's always been the biggest concern from anybody in the county that's been against cannabis. And we have this unit there. I know you guys have done some operations. I'd really like to see that beefed up over the next year if possible, because I think that it hurts the market when, or actually it's creating a new market, which it creates additional problems. And so I'm just curious on where you guys are at with illegal deliveries and going after sales to minors.
Yes, Supervisor Nelson through the chair. I would say over half of our enforcement actions right now are targeting the legal street deliveries. And specifically, we had several cases last year involving the sale to minors. I want to say off the top of my head, 4 to 5 last year that we identified a dealer that sold to a minor. It is also a major area of concern for us, and we do spend a significant amount of time looking into those cases.
Well, thank you, Sergeant Bakes. I think that's really important for everybody to hear and to know that. I think that gives, thank you for the work you guys are all doing in protecting our children. And keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Chair Williams, just for some clarification, you and several board members, Supervisor Nelson, mentioned TOT compliance. I just wanted to remind the board, in our board letter before you, Mr. Clemente points out that your board did adopt and fund a TOT compliance position in the Treasurer Tax Collector's Office in this current budget year to perform proactive audits And I believe they've been able to purchase software so far to assist in this. So your board had the wisdom to do that for this current year.
I have a question about that as well.
Supervisor Lavin.
Thank you. So if I wanted to get a report to list the top 10 TOT folks that are paying tax or they're not paying tax, would I be able to get that information as well?
Supervisor Lavinino through the chair. I don't believe so. No.
Right. So it's also an opaque system. For good reason, right? So it's because they're competitors.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Okay.
There's reasons.
So it's the same,
The treasure tax
same in
collector.
TOT as it is in cannabis. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, my understanding is the treasurer tax collector has those records, but they're protected by privacy like all taxpayers, just like you can't, I can't ask for a copy of somebody's taxes from the IRS, just like that. It's protected by the same protections that is. Do we have any public comment on this item?
Chair Williams and members of the board, we have no request to speak.
And can I get a motion?
Move staff recommendation.
Hartman seconds.
And I was going to just agree with Supervisor Nelson's worries about delivery. You might remember when we started this process, I tried to ban delivery, which the board was ready to do, but the state has preempted that. I'm worried about the level of regulatory oversight we have over delivery. It doesn't mean that there aren't folks doing delivery legally. There is, but we just don't know it because we don't have the regulatory oversight over delivery. The state does, and I'm not sure that it's sufficient. So I do encourage our cannabis enforcement team to, where possible, make sure that basic criminal laws are not being broken. Roll call, please.
Supervisor Hartman?
Aye.
Supervisor Capps?
No.
Supervisor Nelson?
Aye.
Supervisor Lavinino?
Aye.
And Chair Williams?
Aye.
Motion passes 4-1.
We'll go to D2.
And supervisors, as our staff is preparing for D2 in Santa Maria, which is an item on roads fiscal review, I was remiss to open up this last one by just announcing that Paul Clemente is our new budget director. So we want to congratulate Paul, he was promoted. So Paul, Nancy Anderson is still having general oversight, so she's still involved, but Paul is the new Nancy, and Nancy was the new Jeff, and Jeff was the new Tom, so just the long line of succession. So congratulations again to Paul, but that's why we wanted to let you know Paul was presenting these items.
Thank you, Mona.
Chair Williams and
So-
members of the board, departmental item number 2 is from the County Executive Office. It is a hearing to consider recommendations regarding roads, fiscal review, and long-term funding options.
Thank you, Chair Williams and members of the board. Paul Clemente again to present on the roads fiscal issues and long-term funding options. With me is Chris Snedden, and I believe Julie Hagan is down in Santa Barbara from the Public Works Department. I would just like to take a second to thank them and their staff for their work with our office over the past few months on this item. It was a collaborative effort, and they met with us many times, answering all of our questions and providing their input on our final recommendations you're going to hear today. Next slide, please. So for today's presentation, I'll provide a brief overview of the issue we're discussing, as well as some background on the major funds in the Transportation Division, and then dive a little deeper into the Roads Operations Fund and the drivers of the budget gap, and then close it out with staff recommendations. Over the past several budget cycles, Public Works has indicated a growing gap in the Roads Operations Fund 15 between the cost of ongoing operations and the ongoing revenue available to fund it. To maintain status quo operations, the department has been utilizing fund balance in Fund 15, which reduces availability for things like project cash flow needs and emergency reserves. Recommendations will be to increase both Measure A dollars and general fund contribution going to Fund 15. So I'll provide a little background on the three major operating funds in the Transportation Division, as well as a more minor Measure A pass-through fund. The Roads Operations Fund is Fund 15 and conducts ongoing maintenance of roads, sidewalks, trees, bridges, and more, in addition to, among other things, traffic studies, transportation planning, and encroachment enforcement, as well as administration of the division. Fund 16 is the Capital Maintenance Fund, which includes in-house work and contracted projects to address deferred maintenance across the transportation network, including pavement preservation and rehabilitation, drainage and bridge repairs, and traffic safety improvements. Fund 17 is the Capital Infrastructure Fund, which improves and expands the transportation network, including bridge replacements, new transportation facilities, and major asset repair and replacement. Fund 18 is a holding fund that passes Measure A dollars through to the other three funds and then retains unspent Measure A dollars and fund balance for future use. This trend chart shows the total sources of revenue actuals for the past 5 years of those funds we just discussed, which includes use of fund balance. We see relatively flat sources in blue Fund 15 over the period, while the increases we see in the orange Fund 16 are driven both by one-time amounts, such as receipt of SoCal Edison's settlement dollars in fiscal year 1920, and higher usage of fund balance on projects in fiscal year 2021, as well as increasing ongoing sources. SB1 dollars and 18% general fund dollars to Fund 16 combined for a net ongoing increase of almost $9 million over the past 5-year period, from $3.9 million up to $12.8 million. The large spike we see in the gray Fund 17 and 21-22 is mostly the infusion of federal dollars for the Highway Bridge Program, which increased about $14 million from the year before, as well as added general fund dollars to the fund, which totaled about $5.5 million. About $4.5 million of that was temporary general fund loan to help with cash flow on the Floridale Bridge project, which will come back to the general fund once the project is complete. There was also $1 million provided from the general fund, specifically from cannabis tax revenue, to fund the local match portion of the Floridale Bridge project. The Fund 18 amounts we see in yellow at the bottom there is the Measure A funding that was not passed through to these other funds, but remained unspent and was used to increase the fund balance in that fund. There's about $6.3 million in Measure A fund balance today. This slide is just another look at the 21-22 sources and how they flow across the funds. It looks complicated. It's kind of supposed to. It sort of illustrates the various revenues coming in and the funds that they flow to. So we can see there's a wide variety of sources that go to Fund 15, which is the orange, and then Fund 16 in pink. While 17, which is that grayish blue color, was almost entirely the federal dollars and general fund loan I spoke about on the prior slide. You can see that roughly half of Measure A went to Fund 15 and 21-22, small portions to 16 and 17, and then a substantial flow, about $3.8 million, to Fund 18, where it was fund balanced. State revenue going to 15 is mostly highway user tax or HUDA dollars. And in 16, it's specifically the SB1 dollars for road maintenance and rehabilitation. The general fund dollars we see there going to Fund 16 is the 18% for deferred maintenance. So we'll dive a little deeper into Fund 15's fiscal details and the issues they're facing there. The ongoing operations in Fund 15 have three major revenue sources. The first we'll talk about here is Measure A, which we saw on the prior slides is utilized to some extent across all the funds we've been talking about, but primarily in Fund 15. It's a flexible funding source derived from a local 0.5% sales tax distributed by SBCAG with the county share split between North and South County. A minimum of 10% must be used towards alternative transportation. Eligible uses include maintaining, improving, and constructing roadways, bridges, and bicycle and pedestrian facilities, storm damage repair to transportation facilities, as well as using for matching funds for state and regional programs and projects. So there's qualifying uses across all three of the major funds. Public Works brings the Measure A program of projects to your board each spring, recommending allocations on planned projects and programs for the coming fiscal year. Their typical recommendation over the past 5 years has been $6 million of Measure A to Fund 15 for operations, with any remainder budgeted in the other funds. This is a 5-year trend of Measure A across all funds, with the budget amounts in blue and then actuals in orange. And as we can see, the budgeted amounts have been kept fairly flat, averaging about 6.8 million budgeted across all funds for the past 5 years, with again, the majority at 6 million in Fund 15. Over the same period, actual Measure A receipts have grown 35% to almost $9.8 million by fiscal year 21-22. And again, this is a sales tax measure. We've seen that growth in the past couple of years in all of our sales tax derived revenues. As mentioned, funds that come in excess of budget are deposited in fund balance, which the department then typically uses for future projects in Funds 16 and 17. Over the past 5 years, this balance has grown from 700,000 to 6.3 million. HUDA and general fund contribution are the other two significant sources of revenue for their operations in Fund 15. HUDA is a state revenue derived from gas taxes and can be used not only on the construction, improvement, and maintenance of public streets and highways, but also on the administrative costs incurred for those uses. So HUDA can be used on administrative costs in the fund that Measure A cannot. However, actual HUDA receipts have only risen about 6% or $600,000 over the past 5 years. The GFC has stayed almost completely flat at just under $2 million for the same period, as the standard GFC allocation methodology only allocates growth to cover salaries and benefit increases, and only in the same proportion that GFC is to total sources in the fund. In Fund 15, GFC is less than 10% of their total sources. So even if salary and benefits have been growing by hundreds of thousands a year, GFC only grows by tens of thousands. This methodology is allocated the same across all departments and funds that receive GFC, and it anticipates that other operating revenues make up the difference. But as we've seen in this fund, those have remained flat. Permit fees are a more minor source of revenue, totaling about $460,000 in 21-22, but are important to understanding a piece of the budget gap. Permits are issued for work done in the public road right-of-way, and they fund staff time for processing, plan checks, and inspections. They were last updated in 2011, but Public Works is returning in the coming months with an update that will seek full cost recovery, which they estimate could add an additional $450,000. Public Works will provide the specifics of their fee study and proposed fee increases when they return to the board in the coming months. So this slide shows the ongoing operations, revenues, and expenditures in the fund for the 5-year period. Revenues in orange and expenditures in blue. Major drivers in expenditure growth include liability insurance, which has doubled from $700,000 in 17-18 to $1.4 million in 21-22. Salaries and benefits increased $1.1 million, and charges for the countywide cost allocation plan increased $500,000 over this same period. As noted on the prior slides, revenues to cover these increases remained mostly flat. The decreases we see in both expenditures and revenues in 21-22, and expenditures are due to a dip of a couple $1 million for expenses like equipment purchases and things that fluctuate from year to year. So they had some higher years in 19-20 and 2021. We're seeing that come back down in 21-22. The dip in revenues in 21-22 is due to both a loss of some one-time state funding that came in 2021 that wasn't there in 21-22, as well as the department pulling about $2 million less of Measure A fund into Measure A revenues into Fund 15 than in the prior year, due to some funding constraints tied to how the department performed work across districts in 21-22. This chart shows just the ongoing costs and ongoing revenues. Fund 15 as a whole has to balance each year, and so it balanced these gaps that we see in the last 3 years using one-time sources such as higher than anticipated charges for work that staff did in other funds, fund balance draws, or in fiscal year 2021 using 18% funding to offset COVID losses in HUDA and other revenues. Moving on to the staff recommendations. Recommendation 1 is to adopt a budget policy that says, in an effort to eliminate this budget gap, Measure A should be budgeted at fully anticipated amounts, primarily in Fund 15, while continuing to maintain programs and project matches in the other funds. Unanticipated revenue above budget should be recognized and allocated during the year, including to Fund 15 if necessary to mitigate any mid-year issues. This policy should help Fund 15 stay in balance by growing its allocation of Measure A dollars to keep up with operating costs while maintaining flexibility for use in the other funds. It is not prescribing a set dollar amount or set percentage that must go to Fund 15, but does allow Public Works to grow the funding to Fund 15 beyond the flat $6 million from the prior years. If we recall the Measure A budget versus actual chart on slide 10 and the surplus that exists between them, we think there is availability of unallocated funding there that can be budgeted into Fund 15 next fiscal year that wouldn't require any reallocation of Measure A dollars that are currently budgeted in other funds or use of the Measure A fund balance. Recommendation 2 is to increase general fund contribution by $1 million in the fiscal year 23-24 budget, recognizing that administrative costs such as liability rates have had substantial increases over the past 5 years, mostly due to market factors outside the department's control, while HUDA, a revenue source that can be explicitly used for administrative costs, has remained flat. In this situation, it would be appropriate and within existing budget development policies to provide additional GFC to cover these increases and avoid service level impacts in the department. This would represent about a 50% increase in GFC to this fund from just under $2 million to close to $3 million, and was considered a likelihood when we prepared our 5-year forecast in the fall, so would not have any unanticipated impacts on our current 23-24 budget development. Finally, the third recommendation is more informational. It's simply to consider the permit fee increases when Public Works returns in the coming months. Your board will hear more specifics and make your decision at that time on the fees. We just note that existing policy directs departments to seek full cost recovery in their charges and fees, and that annual increases should be included, as is done with fees in other departments, to keep up with cost escalation over time. Again, the department projects this could add about $450,000 to their current revenue stream. Just to touch briefly on alternatives to these recommendations, the department cannot continue to have operating costs that exceed their revenues in this fund without draining fund balance to the point of depletion in the next few years. Reducing ongoing costs to match revenues would be a necessity with service level impacts such as elimination of tree maintenance contracts, stopping regularly scheduled replacement of facilities and equipment and only replacing things as they experience failure, and reducing the amount of materials purchased for annual maintenance work. This would create immediate cost savings in the fund, but would increase longer-term liability costs as well as deferred maintenance needs. The alternative to cost reductions would be increased revenue. If more Measure A dollars are not directed to Fund 15 and costs aren't reduced, then additional GFC beyond the recommended $1 million could be allocated to close the gap. Higher amounts to Fund 15 were not considered in our 5-year forecast or the projections we've been working on for the 23-24 budget, and would thus preclude other projects and priorities that may be funded in the 23-24 budget and would further exacerbate the deficits projected in the out years of the forecast period. So just turning back to the recommended actions, we have them up on the slide, and I'll just recap staff recommendations are establishing a budget policy related to Measure A funding, increasing GFC to Fund 15 in the 23-24 budget, and having the department return to the board for consideration of permit fee increases in the future.
Thank you.
Chair Williams?
Do board members have questions? We'll start with Santa Maria. And I thought that I heard Supervisor Nelson there.
Yes, thank you, Chair Williams. Great presentation. Thank you. I'm in favor of the allocation of the additional $1 million towards this fund. I had a question about other revenues streams that we might be able to look at to address some of these concerns. I'm concerned about the cost recovery model. You know, when we go through cost recovery and through our permitting process, we ignore the fact that part of the reason why we have people get permits is to protect the general public, and part of what those that's where our taxes, you know, our property taxes should be going towards. And when we put that burden completely on the applicants, we get more and more, or actually less and less compliance, and with people not willing to actually get permits for activities. And also changes the dynamic of the relationship with the departments and the applicants. when it's all on based on, hourly service. We've seen some issues with that with planning and other departments, is that's those fee increases that happened in the past. But I also understand that, maybe franchise fees might be something that we could look at in the future, and making sure that those franchise agreements that we have for those people using our right of way, which is a part of the purview of Public Works, that those, I understand we get some revenue from that. And that might be something that we look at eventually moving that towards the road fund and making sure that we maintain the infrastructure in those places. So I know that's not part of this discussion now, but if we go down the route of looking at under other rocks, including permit fee increases, that we should also be looking there as well.
Thank you, Supervisor Nelson. We can look at that. I will note that I believe franchise fee revenue is another one of those sources we talked about in 991 and the prior item. It's all part of the general fund dollars currently right now. I believe it's a few $1 million that comes in. We can take a closer look at that, but I believe it's all part of the GFC we're discussing. We could carve more out, but it would be GFC.
Yeah, for me to understand a little bit better, I like to have that and are those being maximized? There's a lot of providers that are providing services to our constituents that are often using our right of way and producing quite a bit of income. And I know other jurisdictions have been able to maximize that for the benefit of maintaining that right of way. It's not necessarily just a tax to charge them more, but we're obviously underfunded in these areas. And as they receive those benefits, which they're able to make money on, it makes sense that we maintain that. Also, as we're looking at broadband in the future, those are all things that we're going to start to look at as potential revenue sources of entities using our county right away. And so I'm very curious on how that will all work out. If there are opportunities there, I would much rather explore that than increase permit fees, especially at the kind of the end level user. I know some of our bigger operators can absorb those costs, but I know that a lot of our mom and pops and small businesses, it might be a further burden that I would have heartburn putting upon them.
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Mr. Lavanillo.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that this flexibility that we're looking for in Measure A is consistent with the language that was in Measure A that the folks voted on.
Yes, I believe it is. I'll look at Mr. Snedden to verify.
Supervisor Lavanino through the chair. So yes, it is. We would be specifically still tracking Measure A separately in the North County and the South County. So that's one requirement. The second requirement is that you spend 10% on alternative transportation. So we would continue to do that in both the North and South County. And then the third requirement is that it be used for eligible uses. And there's a list of eligible uses. So we'd still be tracking the expenditures to make sure there were eligible uses.
Thank you.
Any other questions from North County? Any questions from South County? Okay, I wanted to make sure there was one thing that didn't slip past us in your presentation. You were discussing the Measure A fund balance. What is that at this point?
Chair Williams, the current Measure A fund balance is about $6.3 million that is unallocated.
And how has that fluctuated over the past few years? Is that up or down? How much is that up or down? How much has been sitting there for that can kind of help take the edge off of this issue?
So Chair Williams, it was about $700,000 in 1718. It has grown to $6.3 million. It's generated by the surplus each year that comes in over budget. So it's a one-time source. This isn't a piece that we are recommending on an ongoing basis being used to cover the gap because it is one-time in nature, but it is that growth in Measure A actuals coming in that we believe there's room to increase their budget in 23-24 to help Fund 15 without needing to touch the fund balance, which they will typically use for kind of the one-time projects that we see in 16 and 17.
Well, I want to make the point that though I agree with the fact that it doesn't solve a long-term need, that roads is one of the few places where it's pretty safe to use one-time expenditures to deal with a budget issue, because you're not hiring a bunch more people that you would then have to fire. So, I agree with the staff recommendations, including putting more general fund in, but I do think that this is, especially since this fund balance barely existed for 5 years ago, that this is fair game for the department to use to maintain our streets and roads. So I support the recommendations, but I also think that it's important to use the money we have at the department's disposal. Do we have a request to speak?
Chair Williams and members of the board, we have one request to speak. We will go to Mark Shatillo via Zoom.
Good afternoon, members of the board. This is Mark Shatillo. I'm speaking on behalf of the Committees for Land, Air, Water, and Species. And while our organization does recognize the importance of roads and capital and preventative maintenance programs, we would like that there be a comparable amount of attention paid to bike and alternative transportation facilities. The bike lanes in Santa Barbara County, in many cases, are not well maintained. The surface condition is similarly degraded. Vegetation management, especially this time of year, encroaches upon the road width. And there is specifically a need for expansion of the network and of individual trail legs. I do want to note to staff that in response to the board's question, that Measure A's alternative transportation allotment is a floor, not a ceiling. And that was it. We do strive for a larger portion of those funds to be set aside and used for alternative transportation projects. And I would note that those actions which do expand or improve or increase the amount of road traffic with the improvement of roadway conditions, to also increases greenhouse gas emissions, as well as increases the emissions of toxic particulate matter from brake and tire wear that have been known for a long time, but are becoming more clear with additional studies. It's our hope that the board would direct staff to also look at the importance of safe alternative transportation, using the roadway infrastructure to provide additional facilities and additional capacity for alternative transportation. We've made some progress throughout the county in improving alternative transportation with the unmet transit needs process at SBCAG, and I appreciate the leadership of the board on that. We're still waiting for the train to join the lane on Highway 101. The expanded Highway 101 is not going to provide the capacity that our community needs. The modeling shows that there will be future traffic congestion, even with the additional lane. And so there is a need for additional board leadership on alternative transportation. Apropos of this item, to expand the bike network. With the advent and expansion of e-bikes, there's now considerably increased range and the enhanced viability of e-bikes as alternatives to single occupancy vehicles, as well as the importance of pedestrian facilities and the need to integrate housing, alternative transportation facilities, and maintenance, so that our community's quality of life and transportation options continue to be robust as we move forward. So we'd ask the board to direct staff to include these alternative transportation components in the analysis and the recommendations as they go forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair Williams and members of the board, we have no further requests to speak.
Any comments from the board? I'll just agree with Mr. Chatillo that those are excellent points. We still have many mobility projects, bike, pedestrian projects out there that to do, and I think transit's in an interesting time. They lost ridership during the pandemic, They have the potential to recapture ridership, but to do so requires you to expend money to improve service at a time when your fare box is smaller. And I do think that it's an important thing for the board to be involved in how we are part of those solutions. In the past, we've been part of those solutions with more bus shelters, more other amenities that help ridership. And I encourage the department to bring us other ideas that are outstanding. We will now recess to closed session. Do we have, oh, we need a motion, that's right.
Chair Williams, I am happy to move approval of staff recommendations for funding measures in items A through D.
I second.
Sorry, Julie, I didn't mean to give you a heart attack there.
Discussion,
Motion.
just for discussion real quick.
Yes, Supervisor Nelson.
Chair Williams, I'm going to go ahead and support this motion. I do have some hesitation about the future permit fee increases, but that's for another hearing. I guess this can be visited at this point. So I'm willing to support it being looked at, but that does not signal that I'll be supporting that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
And Chair Williams, just to clarify, that was a motion by Supervisor Capps and a second by Supervisor Lavanino.
Correct.
Wonderful. Supervisor Hartman.
Aye.
Supervisor Capps.
Aye.
Supervisor Nelson.
Aye.
Supervisor Lavanino.
Aye.
Chair Williams.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
We will recess to closed session. Rachel, can you give us a preview of what we are going to work on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. We have one item of existing litigation, Michelle Crane versus County of Santa Barbara. It's a Santa Barbara Superior Court case. And we also have Conference with Legal Counsel anticipated litigation. It's significant exposure to civil litigation, one case based on the facts and circumstances listed in the agenda. I believe we can do these items fairly quickly, as long as we're ready to go in the next 5 minutes. I think we could do it in 30 minutes and be back.
Thank you. Then we will be back at 1:45. We are back from closed session. County Council, can you report out from closed session? Can you hear us in the North County?
We can.
Oh, great.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. The board met in closed session on 2 items, 1 item of existing litigation, Crane versus County of Santa Barbara, and 1 item of anticipated litigation, significant exposure to civil litigation based on the facts and circumstances in the agenda, and the board took no reportable action.
Thank you. We will adjourn to March 21st in Santa Barbara.